get started.
Yeah.
I always get questions about how is Pavi doing, and how is your relation in India, your mom?
My mom.
Yeah. So can you fill them in? Because I always get that question, and
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? Can I ask?
I'm good. My mom, I just talked to her a few minutes ago. She's immobile. She's in bed and she can't really move or anything. So everything has to be done for her. But she's in good spirits. Just talking about, she's the one who raised me to love Jesus. It's so funny I think she still sees me as like a 10-year-old. So it's awesome.
And sometimes you probably are.
I am. I totally am.
I know I am. So
Oh, she's awesome. She's a fireball. Very intense, passionate, kind of prophetic in the way she... But she's suffering a lot. Oh my gosh. I knew this coming.
Good morning.
This is my mother.
kind of match.
Yeah, kind of.
Always.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for asking. I know they do. People call me Mike all the time. But thank you for asking.
Yeah.
So I want to do a complex piece of theology with you today. I know it's early in the morning. I'm really sorry to wake you up. So, let's just dive in. So, on the handouts, I'm just going to walk through some of this stuff. 1 Timothy 1:5-6. I love this passage. The aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Love from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion. That is one. You should memorize that verse. And you should frame your own engagement around the Word of God right centered in this verse. This is the point of our study. This is the point of all theologizing, all teaching, all reflection on the Word, is that you and I would get to that love that issues from a pure heart, and a good conscience, and a sincere faith. And then if you wander away from it, he spells it out, right? He led us in vain discussion. And the stuff that we're going to talk about today, I think is right on that edge there. And then a second verse that guides my heart in doing complex theology is, this is what the Lord says. Heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. Where is the house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? And so they come into being, declares the Lord. These are the ones I look on with favor, those who are humble and contrite of spirit and who tremble at my word. So I put these two passages before you as a good way to guard your heart as we dive in. So by the end of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, through what's the 5th book? Okay, we're waking up. Okay. Well, at the end of the Torah, Israel is ready to enter the Promised Land. Moses is dead, and there's a new leader for Israel, who is Joshua. And Israel is ready to settle down. They've been wandering in the desert for 40 years now, ready to settle down, but the Promised Land is already occupied, right? By at least 7 other nations. We'll come to that in a bit. Now, the promise of the land had begun with Abraham a long time ago. You read in Genesis chapter 12, the Lord had said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abraham went, as the Lord had told him, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. Now, the only piece of the promised land that Abraham actually owned in his lifetime was a cave where he buried Sarah. If you remember that, he bought it for like 400 shekels of silver from Ephron. Anyway, that was the only piece of land that Abraham actually possessed. But the promise was to his descendants, right? Then after Abraham comes, of course, Isaac, and then Jacob, and then you have Jacob's 12 sons, the patriarchs. Then these 12 sons and their families end up in Egypt because of Joseph, but then they end up in slavery for 400 years, something like that. And then God sends Moses to deliver them, and Moses does. But because, and this is important, because Israel cannot trust God, cannot keep trusting Him, they end up wandering the desert 40 years, till that whole generation died away. Now, there's a new generation of people, there's a new leader, and now they're going to enter the Promised Land. So then, and now we face the problem. This is the issue that I want to discuss. The Promised Land is occupied by these 7 nations, and Israel is commanded to destroy them. Remember that? And so we read that Joshua leads Israel into some pretty intense violence at God's command. That's the issue I want to focus on today. How do we make any sense out of this genocide, right? And I don't know that I have a clear answer. I'm not sure that there is a clear answer, but what I'd like to do with you is to put down maybe 10 propositions that can guide our reflections. And then I would love it if you dove in with me, so that we could be very participative and push the issue, flesh it out, and see how far we can get. So let's dive in. Joshua chapter 8, verse 24. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. But Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. So Joshua burned Ai and made it a permanent heap of ruins, a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate. And they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. So how do you feel about this?
Sounds excessive.
Yeah, totally.
Sounds a lot like maybe some of the stuff that's been happening recently.
Yeah,
ISIS.
yeah.
But did he want to clean the land so that when the Israelites went there was no other influence other than his?
I hear you. But these are real people. Right?
It makes me wonder if this was Joshua's way or God's way.
Interesting. Why would you say that?
Because he was human,
Okay.
and he was the leader.
Yeah.
And leaders don't always make the right choice.
And you don't think God would do that?
It's hard.
It's hard.
to believe that.
Yeah, it's hard to swallow that. Right? Yeah.
I don't know all the context of history, but I think culturally back then, usually women were scared.
Yeah. This is late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, roughly. Yeah. This is some of the most difficult stuff in the Old Testament. Many questions come to mind, like how do you connect this with Jesus telling us to love our enemies, do good to those who hate you, turn the other cheek? How the heck does this fit with any of that, right? And then that leads us to questions like, is the God of the Old Testament somewhat different than Jesus, right? These are common ways to resolve the tension. And then we can take it further. We can read this and say, maybe then this authorizes us to use violence against our enemies, right? God ordained violence against the enemies of his people, so surely we can do the same. And this is the kind of logic that led to the Crusades, for instance. And if you know the history of Islamic interaction with Christianity, you kind of know where the violence started. Crusades were brutal. But people felt that God had commanded Joshua to do it, so they could do it. And then there's a final question, which is, what does it do to us when we engage in violence like this? Right? One of my good friends' brother, my assistant's brother, is a captain in the infantry. And he's in special forces right now, but he was in combat in Afghanistan for 2 years. And at that time he was about 25, 26. Then when he came back, his sister asked me if I would spend some time with him. We got together and we took a long walk. And this guy's about 6'3", he's like your prototype, special forces guy. Constantly jittery. Just walking down the campus in Ohio State. We start talking and he's like, there's so much anger within me. Can't sleep at nights. Wake up screaming. I can't talk the word so much that I had to do. I can't even acknowledge to myself, let alone to anybody else. I'm in therapy, but and I felt like I was talking to someone from a different universe. Some of the things he talked about, I have no way of imagining that someone could do that and continue. And he's being fast tracked. He's doing really well in his career. And he talked about his friends who have fallen apart, who have come back and picked up various addictions. The suicide rate among returning soldiers is very high. If you look it up, it's pretty significant. So this is a whole issue of what violence does to us when we are commissioned to do violence. And if that's the case, then why would God command us to do violence? See the questions that come up?
Do we know anything about the people of Ai? Or
They were wicked. We come to that, but they certainly were not squeaky clean. Now, there's another question there. Is it the case that all of them were
incorrect?
right?
Well, because we have a flood, we have
Yeah.
cities being burned, this type of stuff. So we've seen God do things similar
Right.
to this in the
Right.
past. Okay?
Right.
So
Yeah. It's going to get real messy as we go through this thing today. So let's see. So the first thing I want to say is that after 2,000 years of people reflecting on this, and 3,000 years of Jewish scholars reflecting on it, we don't have a good answer to this. I just start off by saying we don't have a good answer. We don't know how to reconcile this complex issue because this question on its own of violence is only part of a much larger cluster of questions, which has to do with evil altogether. Where did evil come from? How is it possible that evil exists in a universe created by a God who doesn't have any evil in him? And what's that all about?
It's kind of one of the big stumbling blocks of evangelism.
Yeah.
Of reaching
Yeah.
people who were like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
your God who says to go do this, right?
Right.
It's a huge,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How can you reconcile this?
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. On a side note, when people bring it up in evangelism, a useful way to turn the corner is to reframe it as, why does goodness exist? And if you can get someone to actually think about that, suddenly the game is altogether different. So anyway, but that's a whole other side note. Habakkuk, the prophet Habakkuk, this is 2,500 years ago, he struggles with the same question. You read in Habakkuk 1, your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than himself? Then as you go on through the book, you realize Habakkuk is struggling with evil first, and then he's struggling with the fact that God uses evil people to accomplish justice. So a couple of general comments. First of all, we're deep into what the Bible calls mystery here. And therefore, it's too easy to come up with simplistic answers that dismiss a large part of the Bible, or even question God's character flippantly, or even worse, portray God in a way that justifies our own sin. And we do that. That's peculiar, but we do that pretty regularly. We won't understand everything. And even the things that we do understand, we understand in a limited and provisional way. The more you immerse yourself in the Bible, honestly, you realize it creates more questions than it answers. And that's a good thing. Many times I think that a great question is worth 1,000 good answers. Because it makes you think. And part of this faith journey is thinking honestly, seriously about the difficult places. But having done all that, you read Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever. In other words, we will not know everything. There's just no way to get there. But then the question is, why would God do that? Why would he keep things from us? Why won't he tell us everything? And the couple comments there. First of all, we don't have the capacity to know all things. We are creatures, finite creatures. There's a limit to what we can actually comprehend. So we won't be able to comprehend it. And second, and this is critical, knowledge is not a pure good. There's a common assumption that the more you know, the better off you are. But in God's economy, knowledge is not a pure good. You think about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It represents something. There's a sense in which God is saying to us from the start, you don't decide what is good and what is evil, let me tell you. So right off the bat, he puts constraints in what is good for us to know. Okay, having said all that, let me dive into 10 propositions that will help us think through this issue of violence. And what I'd like to do is to put each proposition up and then let's discuss it. And then we'll go to the next and then try to synthesize all these things together. So first proposition, God commends this total destruction. Deuteronomy 7, verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you're entering to possess and drives out before you many nations, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, the Mosquitobites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you, and when the Lord your God has delivered them over to you and you have defeated them, then you must destroy them totally. Make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. So now you have, the question you raise is, did God really say that? Well, it looks like it. Now you can ask the further question is, did they record it right? Maybe God said something, but then they wrote this to justify what they had done. And then now you're looking at issues of inspiration and all of that. But it certainly seems like God is commanding total destruction. How do you feel about that?
Maybe it sets the stage for what's to come. Meaning, there's a price to pay for our evil, right?
Yeah.
And he's trying to maybe set the stage that this is very bad, but also what people have done very bad.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think you're exactly right. That's true. But you still have this excessive violence being done to actual persons, actual people, right? That's a tension there.
When you say, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Do you mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I still can't reconcile it. I still cannot reconcile it. In my head, I've gone through the studies, I hear people talk about it, I've heard people talk about it from the stage, and I still go, that ain't right. That ain't right. There's a little baby in a crib.
Yeah.
There's a little light baby somewhere who did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, kill all the bad people. Don't kill the little baby. That baby did nothing. And there's a lot of those little babies in that town somewhere.
Yeah.
That's the way I feel about it.
Yeah, well said.
It's like, God, you could have done it differently.
Yeah.
But then, I hear the other voice in my head, and that's some fine preacher saying, God's ways are not your ways, and your ways are not God's ways, and He's smarter than you are. But it still doesn't feel
It
right.
still doesn't feel right. Thank you for saying that.
Maybe I'm cold heartless, but
Yeah.
evil exists. I mean,
Yeah.
and the older I get, the more I realize you could never bargain with Hitler. That's not. And I'm trying to teach my kids that there are people in this world that mean you harm. That Johnny 44 are liars and murderers, and they're lying and speak their native tongue. You can't trust them. And you can bargain to some degree, but there's going to come a point where you face evil. And evil exists, and it is, so, I'm going, yeah, see that, but also, Jesus, upon his return, commits genocide. Okay? Evil is wholeheartedly punished. So the question is, what's our role? Was that really Joshua going too far? Or, what's the timing of that? But those, and not that I'm going to take it in my hands, but also just realizing, well, that I can't trust that person, and they are going to get punished. So what's my role in that? Even to the point of being a martyr. The martyrs, they faced inherent evil without opposition. And, so it just brings up all those questions of, yes, God should punish Nero. That he was the epitome of that, and yet, you have Missouri Christians that faced him and died as martyrs in the midst of that. But that's still, when you read Revelation, you realize, wow, that they have a special place. So it's like you see it, and I don't. And the thing is, it's like the great thing is I've never really encountered. I've never had to do what your friend's brother did. We're not out there firsthand having to. Marine, so you probably.
How do you? Even like as a culture, I believe in my country. I think we are a good country. Well, we're the same country that dropped atom bombs on.
Yeah.
Because we were fighting evil. Well, there were tens of thousands of innocent children who had nothing to do with the evil rulers of those countries. We firebombed Dresden, just firebombed the city that had no military value, but it helped us end the war quicker. I get it. I can ration. Everything can be. Every one of these steps can be rational. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I mean, as a kind of military and history guy, I totally get it. So maybe some of that is God's strategy. God's strategy was the same way, right?
Yeah.
So you look how messed up that region of the world is still, right? So did they not get far enough? What's the other side of this question? Well, and I don't believe that, but I'm just asking that, right? The their part, if you continue to read this text, it talks about not allowing your daughters to be taken by them as spouses and don't take their daughters as your spouse. So they couldn't have killed them all, otherwise that wouldn't have been an issue.
Well said.
So, how do you feel? How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel that the God who is love commands, because we're trying to type it, right? We're reading this verse right now.
Right.
God commanded Joshua to wipe them out. Is that okay with you?
It makes me feel I have to trust him because it makes no sense to me. Absolutely no sense at all. As a human, as a person, as a child of God. Dan, I don't know why you did that, but I'm sure you got a good reason. Maybe later I'll find out what it is, but I don't know now. I'll just have to live my life knowing that what you do is right and best.
Yeah.
If I don't believe that, now I'm going to try and change things and make them my way just because I feel that way.
Yeah.
And my feelings really have no place in my faith. I don't, and maybe I'm wording that wrong.
Yeah.
But my faith has to be real, whether you do something good, whether you do something totally atrocious.
Yeah.
If I believe you are who you say you are, then I have to trust that. So at least that's.
And this God that we're looking at right now is saying, good, because I might wipe you out.
Well, he made me. He has the right to, he says in Romans.
Right.
Well, I have the right to do that.
I might wipe you out and you don't even deserve it.
Yeah.
I may mean to wipe your wife out, and you might just be standing right there, and you might have to go with her. So good thing you trust me, but don't you're not going to buy any points with that little attitude
We
right there.
talk
because I
about
might
these
just
other countries.
Mike is channeling really well here.
You think so? Well, Job had to go through a tremendous. Well, why?
Yeah.
He didn't do anything,
Yeah.
but he had to stay faithful. Well, he did
Yeah.
stay faithful.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things for me. Old Testament is God getting our attention.
Yeah, I get it. So your response to your feeling is faith. But I still don't know what your feeling is. Is your feeling is that a feeling of apathy? Is it of resignation? Is it I don't like you, but I'll accept it? Is that what it is? It's like
well, the I don't like you part I can't agree with.
no, I'm not asking you. I'm asking what is it for you?
I don't like it per se.
Yeah.
But I gotta trust that God knows what He's doing.
Yeah, but you don't like it. That's the way you feel.
That's
You don't like it.
I would not. That's not the way I would have done it.
Right. Right.
But then God knows a whole lot more than I do.
Yeah, you keep jumping away, but
Yeah.
Yeah, you're very patient with them. I'll tell you that.
You want to say something?
Yeah, for me it's just a sense of being dumbfounded. Because
Yeah,
I mean,
dumbfounded.
what warrants death?
Yeah.
Because in the Old Testament, you also see people that God smites for stuff far less of like turning around and looking back.
Yeah.
Lot and his wife, and
So do the Israelites, how do they get away with whatever
They
sins
do
they have?
plenty of sinful things.
Yeah.
It just makes me think of the verse in Romans of objects of wrath.
Uh-huh.
And like that perplexes me. Why would God create objects just for? I mean, we're all inherently sinful, and God chooses us
Yeah.
to.
No, none of us want to stay with the text.
It makes
That's the
me feel
thing.
afraid.
No, nobody
Yeah.
wants to go, okay, that's the way it
That's
is.
terms
Yeah.
of
It makes me feel afraid.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's like, what if I'm on this side of the verse,
Right.
not on Joshua's side of the verse?
Right,
That's how, like, when I really think about this Deuteronomy verse, I'm like,
right.
that's scary.
We are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We are.
yeah.
That's the problem.
So we jump to, here's what it says next in the verse. Maybe there's something that warrants that. We cannot, it seems like I've even heard from everybody, I'm guessing everybody goes, okay, can't live with that.
Yeah.
Let's try to explain it. Let's try to explain it. Because the raw data says, God said wipe out all those people, I don't care who you come across. We're just like, okay, I don't know how to, we got to go to the next, we got to figure this thing. Somebody give me an explanation. Evil's bad, so we can do it. Or maybe it wasn't complete annihilation, it was intermarriage. Maybe it's just an issue of faith. Yeah, all this stuff is good. But this, not good. Can't live with that.
Yeah.
God can't be that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Cannot be that way.
You know,
Must be another explanation.
One of the most wonderful things about Judaism, which we have completely lost in our Christian faith, is that Jewish scholars were very comfortable being outraged with God.
Say it again.
Very comfortable being outraged with God. Very comfortable arguing, debating, contesting, and they saw support for that position in the Old Testament. You know, like Abraham tells God, "Will the judge of all the earth not do right?" Remember that about holding the Lord. So there's a sense of Job debates God, and so Jewish scholars are willing to contest it, to contest the witness of the text, and say, "Hang on, I know you said that, but let me tell you what I think." Whereas for us, we feel somewhere that that's not allowed. You know, who are you to argue with them, right? So that's there. Let's keep moving. Proposition number 2, the destruction is God's judgment on these nations for their sin. So we read Deuteronomy 9, it is an account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. Does the judgment seem harsh? Well, there's been no doubt from the beginning that sin and wickedness will bring God's judgment and death, right? Genesis 2, the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Sin brings death. All sin brings death. Witness the New Testament, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and the wages of sin is death. Right? So if you choose to sin, you choose death. Deuteronomy 11, verse 26, see, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today, the curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God. And this proposition makes sense. This proposition can easily cover over our emotion, our feeling that Mike was pushing into, right? You can say, well, I don't feel good about it, but clearly that's what God promised from the beginning. So then, of course, you have the question of mercy. So that's proposition 2. Proposition 3 is that God's judgments and Jesus' judgments are one and the same. And there's a complex passage from the Gospel of John, chapter 5. Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Very truly I tell you, a time is coming and has now come, that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to judge, because he is the Son of Man. Do not be amazed at this, for the time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done what is good will rise to live, and those who have done what is evil will rise to be condemned, judged, the same word. By myself I can do nothing, I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. There's a lot in this passage, but the bit that I want to point out is that there's no distinction between God's judgment and Jesus' judgment. Is that clear? I mean, there's no question there, right? Okay. Proposition 4. God's mercy infuses his judgment with patience. So God is patient. He does all that he can to bring us to repentance. Because of his great love for us, he's patient, he's disciplining us, urging us to repent and turn to him. And even when we take advantage of his patience to continue to do evil, he's still patient. 2 Peter 3, verse 3, above all you must understand that in the last days scoffers will come scoffing and following their own evil desires. They will say, where is this coming he promised? But do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. Instead, he is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance. in keeping with his promise, we are looking forward to a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. So then, dear friends, since you are looking forward to this, make every effort to be found spotless, blameless, and at peace with him. Bear in mind that our Lord's patience needs salvation, just as our dear brother Paul also wrote to you with the wisdom that God gave him. So he's patient in his judgment. And his patience, at least there are three implications of it. One is he's patient with our present sins. Yeah, you and I could be swallowed up right now. He's patient with our sins. The second aspect, he's patient with our feeble witness. He's patient with the inadequate ways, perhaps, in which we bear witness to the world around us, because he wants all to be saved. That's crystal clear. And he's patient with those who have not heard of him yet, or who have heard of him and reject him, or a whole host of things. In fact, we must therefore then assume that he was patient with the Canaanites. Is that fair? We still have the profound discomfort with the fact that he did this, but at least we can assume he's being patient, which is true. Because when Abraham was in the land, that was a time when Sodom and Gomorrah were already in a pretty bad place. So hundreds of years later, the patience of God extends for hundreds of years, and maybe that's the culmination of it. And if you say, well, but Israel had revelation that the Canaanites didn't, yes, but it's a matter of degree, it sounds like. So listen to Paul and Barnabas in Acts 14. They come to Lystra and they say, we are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things, these idols, to the living God who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past he let nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without witness. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in the season. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy. So we must assume that even though the Canaanites did not know Yahweh, we must assume that they have sensed enough of the goodness of God in providence that they could have turned towards him. Okay, that's what the text seems to imply. Again, here I'm simply trying to represent the text. I'm not telling you what I think yet. This is what the text says. Fair enough? Okay. Now we start to turn the corner. So far, so good. But now we're going to get into some things that might be provocative. Number 5, Israel is God's agent to enact his judgment on Canaan. Okay? Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4. After the Lord your God has driven them out before you, do not say to yourself, the Lord has brought me here to take possession of this land because of my righteousness. No, it is account of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is going to drive them out before you. It is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of the land, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. The Lord your God will drive them out before you to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand then that it is not because of your righteousness that the Lord your God is giving you this good land to possess, for you are a stiff-necked people. So, two distinct thoughts here. One is the promised land is theirs not because of their righteousness. Second, they are God's instrument to accomplish his judgment. The question is, why would God command them to execute his judgment? Why not send a natural disaster upon them?
He's their chosen people.
Okay.
Will they obey him? Will they trust him to do things that they're not wanting to do?
They probably had the same feelings we had about it, right? So after spending 40 years out wandering around and becoming obedient, how obedient are you? Well, here's a test. Here's an ultimate test.
That's a pretty cool test, though.
Yeah, but why do that based on all of the stuff that you just talked about knowing what violence can do to our heart?
Yeah, right. Right.
It's a cruel
It's not the sort
assignment.
of thing. Yeah. It's not the sort of character building assignment.
It's the same issue. Okay, wait a minute. You're asking me to go kill those people?
Yeah, if you want to graduate from VLR, you go out and find some wicked person and execute them and come back. That's part of, Mike's requirements. That's insane, right?
Right, so you have to chuckle at that. You think, no, that's what God just did.
That's what God just did.
So if you want to be my people, then I'm going to ask you to do violence.
Yeah.
Tom had a Christian ask him once in a class if that was okay. They were really against abortion, and so didn't he ask you if it was okay to bring damage or kill
Is
that?
it okay to exchange the bullet for a ballot?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Against the doctor, right, that
Yeah.
performed abortion, was performing the abortions.
Right, that's attention.
That's attention.
That's attention. God, and we're looking at a situation where God is condoning violent actions, and not just condoning, instituting them. Like,
Maybe the problem was they didn't argue with God. Because Moses argued, God changed his mind.
Okay. Spell that out. You're onto something
They,
there.
when when God basically just said, Moses, look, I'm just going to destroy these people.
Yeah.
And Moses goes, whoa, hold on, what about your name? What about, did he, and you say, well, did God change his mind about destruction at that point? Should have, they argued. And because they were stiff-necked, they didn't. There
What do you
wasn't
think about
dialogue.
that? What do you think about this? Should Joshua have said, hang on here?
What? I'm not doing that.
Yeah. That doesn't sound like you, God. Would you do that?
I think I would. Hey, there's a heavy dialogue here.
Okay. I mean, you're onto something here, man. This is
I
awesome.
really
Yeah.
believe the Holy Spirit is within me. And Jesus, if we're talking, that should be the logical question.
Yeah.
Why?
Fine.
And logically, I would think it'd be easier to argue with God than go kill someone for just personally right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, put it
Me
this
too.
way, I have no problem arguing when you ask me to go share the gospel with somebody.
Yeah. I love the way you think. That's awesome. So maybe the proposition that we're reflecting on here is maybe Joshua should have argued with God instead of just debating him. That's a complicated thought, isn't it? So God commands something, and we're saying what he ought to have done is to have actually argued with that command. That's a complex thought.
Yeah, but my military mind says that's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
No. It's,
The chain of command, you just do it.
It's like God is God.
Yeah.
And he says, and do this. Well, time out, God, I don't want to do that. Okay, fine. Bill, you do it.
Bill, you do.
Yeah.
So what do you think of
Way
Moses, the example that he... Tell me your name.
Doug.
Doug. The example that Doug gave of Moses telling God on.
There's a time and a place.
Okay.
And Moses was a little earlier in the history.
Okay.
And the conversation and the relationship between he and God was a little different.
Yeah.
There was a little, at least for the way I understand Scripture. Moses was like this with God. You know, Joshua maybe not so much. So now it's a little different relationship. So do I have the same freedoms?
You're onto something here. This is really good. Okay.
You know, if I have a good relationship with God, I'm going to challenge him. Just like your best friend. Hey, Fred, you can't do that. That's stupid.
Okay.
You say that to a stranger.
Yeah.
And there's a way big difference here.
Right.
So a lot of it for me depends on my relationship. with God. And again, I go back to my trust. I don't understand what you're trying to do here, but I guess I have to do it. I don't think it's right. You know I don't think it's right. But if you tell me to do it, by golly, I'm going to do it. But again, it's the relationship. For me.
This is really fascinating because what Doug said and what you said, they work together really. Because you're saying it's perhaps you should have argued back. And you're saying that perhaps that would come out of a relationship. If there's a depth of relationship, then there's a familiarity that allows that to happen. What do you all think about that?
I wouldn't argue with God if I was in the Old Testament.
But we just established the judgment of both the one and the same, the Old Testament and Jesus.
Yeah, but it's clearly, that's the problem. I've even asked this question to people, how do you know God is a loving God?
He sent his son to die.
Yes.
Exactly. That's the best indication.
Yeah.
So you think people walk around this world that don't even embrace Jesus, but they have this idea that Jesus is going to be kind to them. I think, why? Would you ever think that?
I don't think that.
If you don't embrace Jesus at all, you have to live with an Old Testament God. or any kind of a God.
Who isn't loving?
They're all not loving.
Yeah, it's not
when
clear.
you think about
Yeah.
any kind of history of man and God, it's this fearful, let me try to,
Placate you somehow.
placate you somehow. Let me
Yeah.
throw a virgin in the volcano. Let me shoot this person. Let me take care. Let me sacrifice this. And some hope that you won't snuff me out. Living under that, I don't argue with you. It wouldn't be within the human psyche to argue with God, except in today's post-Jesus one, in my opinion. It's like that would be, it's like totally comfortable for us to go, I'd argue with God.
Yeah.
And I think, man,
That's suicidal.
it's suicidal, particularly if you don't, it is. That's what it feels like.
If you don't have the relationship to understand where you can go.
Yet Moses, like Doug was saying, and you look at David, the psalmist, it's constantly like, oh, God, you've sold me up the river here,
Yeah.
But, I don't know.
So the same sort of thing with this. Moses only actively took one life.
Right.
In Egypt.
Yeah.
So he argues with God for 40 years, but God just, swallows people in a pit, sends snakes. Moses never had actively. I take that back. They did actively kill people.
Well, in the parting of the...
But
it still was...
But there still is a,
God was
I
doing
guess I
it.
take
He
that
didn't
back.
raise his hand directly and take someone's life. Is what he's saying.
Yeah, Moses was there were times when he just...
You're on something there.
God just does it.
Yeah.
So maybe if Joshua had argued, God would have found another method by which to destroy it.
To execute his judgment, whatever. Do you guys ever watch Fiddler on the Roof?
Yeah.
I love that movie. I learned to pray from watching that movie, honestly. And just watching the way he interacts with God. I mean, if you had a plan, why don't you make me a rich man? This would have been a good thing to do. What is up with that? There's a refreshing relationship going on, back and forth. And that's the sense we get, Could he have argued back? Well, yes, perhaps if he had a relationship. Could he have asked God, can you do it some other way? You know, if you have to execute your judgment, why through me? You know, perhaps those are great insights. You guys are really awake.
One example would just be where Abraham was asking God, if there's 7 good people, spare them 5.
Yeah.
That's the exact same thing.
Exact same thing.
Well, he didn't have to do it, but
Yeah, interceding for,
So one quick side note, back to the evangelism question.
Yeah.
Does it make sense to you for me to say, this is why it's not really fair if someone's questioning, that we would just give them an answer, an explanation, because they should question it.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a disservice to someone who is
Yeah.
trying to find their way back to God and coming across things like this and going, this can't be. For
Yeah.
us to go, oh, no. This is just an issue of trust, or this is just an issue of this. Here's the answer to that. Move on. I think
Right.
inside your soul, they're going to be like,
Yeah.
okay, I hear your answer, but
Yeah.
And I think you have to let people
You're
live
right.
there.
You're
I
right,
don't know what
Mike.
it is about Christianity, but you can even feel it in this room. We've been taught not to live there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the earlier stuff about just being honest and going, it's a mystery to me too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Just because I believe doesn't mean I know everything.
Yeah.
I certainly don't.
Yeah.
But I do believe in Christ.
Yeah.
And I know He does in my life.
Yeah.
So I have to believe there's some answer. I just don't know it all.
Yeah.
And I probably never will. So just
Yeah.
start there.
The three of the most common things people say in evangelism or in debate is, gosh, the Bible makes no sense at all. It's a weird book, it's confusing. And I always say, you're absolutely right. In fact, I give you more evidence for that.
What I tell people is, hey, Poppy doesn't understand it.
No.
There's no way any of us are.
Another one they say is, what about the church? It's so screwed up. And I'm like, it is really screwed up. And I can give you more data for that too than you know.
I use Poppy for that example as well.
And a third one is that the God seems utterly arbitrary and capricious. And then you can say, you're absolutely right, He does.
Yeah.
At that point, you're in conversation. You're not in debate. They're not sure what to do now. You agree with everything. And now, oddly enough, they might turn the corner and say, oh, that's true. Why do you then believe? Now suddenly you're in a whole different conversation. No? What Mike said is exactly right. That willingness to not give that quick answer. In fact, all the strategy of the old apologetics, where you memorize all the answers and trot them out, utterly pointless, in my opinion. There's value in knowing it, but not so much value in using it. If that makes sense. Okay, so here's a potential answer to the question: why would God tell Joshua to do it? I mean, that's one of the questions left hanging there. Why would He tell him to do it? Well, that is part of our calling as His regents on this earth. Right? He created us. What did He say to Adam and Eve? He gave them rule, dominion over all the earth, right? They are His agents. In fact, it is part of our calling, Old Testament and New, to exercise judgment. This is very complex. Listen to Paul in 1 Corinthians 6. He says, if any of you has a dispute with another, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels, whatever that means? How much more the things of this life? So you see Paul's perspective? He's like, you believers are going to civil court. Why would He do that? You ought to take care of it yourself. Who better than you, filled with the Spirit, to exercise judgment?
How does that coincide with judge not lest you be
We
judged?
come to that. Great question. Yeah, we come to that. It's a very, very good question here, right? Judge not, that you be not judged. And at the same time, judge. Supposed to judge. Okay, so we'll move to the next one. This will all come back in the next few points. Number 6, God is able to be entirely righteous when He executes judgment.
It's not like our judgment.
Yeah. We're getting there. So you read Rev 16, then I heard a loud voice from the temple telling the 7 angels, go and pour out on the earth the 7 bowls of the wrath of God. So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth. And I heard the angel in charge of the water say, just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments. And I heard the altar saying, yes, Lord God the Almighty, true and just are your judgments. Now, I don't fully understand that. Here, I feel like what I see is what a witness being given to the fact that God's judgments are just. I'm not entirely sure I get it. And that may be one of those things that I'll never understand. But the witness of the Word of God, of the angels of God, is that His judgments are just. In other words, when God sets before us death and life, and when we choose death, and then He's patient and patient and patient, and then He enacts exactly what He said He would do with death, He is utterly just in His actions. There's no taint in His actions. Does that sound fair, reasonable?
What do you mean by there's no taint?
It sounds reasonable to me. If I'm what I'm hearing, again, intellectually, it sounds
Yeah.
very reasonable, which is, it's that kind of mystery here,
Yeah.
but it is God has set before us. This
Yeah.
is good, and this is bad.
Yeah.
We go about our ways.
Yeah.
And then at some point, judgment happens. And his judgment is right. It
Is
is
right.
true.
Yeah.
There is no error.
You're right.
I can totally, completely believe that.
Yeah. It's hard to.
Yeah,
hard to comprehend.
and I can even look back at these horrible passages, really.
Yeah.
These horrible passages and go, I can't get that, but I can get God is true.
Yeah.
God is right. God is just.
Yeah.
I can't get that.
You can.
I can.
You can.
I can get that.
Yeah.
It still doesn't feel right, but I can get.
Yeah.
I know God is just. I know that. I trust that. In the core of me, I trust that.
Yeah.
So I can get there. That's the only part so far this morning that I can get to. I can actually get to. I don't know why. I just seem to. It's like I can trust that God has it. That if there is a perfect judge,
Yeah.
God is it.
God is it.
In a way that we don't know.
Yep. Yep.
Is it different than it's right because he's the judge, or is it just right?
Yeah.
Is there a difference? Like I was thinking about a courtroom I was in, and I was watching this judge handle multiple cases, one after the other. And in each case, he would bend the law, in a sense, or change the consequence based on the demeanor and the presentation of the person. I was like, wow. If you were sort of, cocky, and I remember there was a young kid who was like, blah, blah, and he just he threw the book at her. And the next lady was very humble, and she had a little 2-year-old on her leg, and she was like, I need mercy, and he was like, I'm going to help you out. And I think he's exactly right, because he's the judge, but that's different than it's purely, it is the exact right judgment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Is God just because there's an external standard of justice to which he matches up? Or is God just by definition?
Yeah.
Right? That's an old question. And there is no external standard because God is. So there's that. What we will have to deal with is the fact that God does this and declares it just, and that defines justice for us, if that makes sense. We don't have any other metric. We don't know anywhere else to go. So we have the witness that just are your judgments. We say, okay, we put that down as a fixed point in this belief system. As we evaluate whether this belief system makes sense to us or not, but that's a fixed point. God's judgments are just.
What Mike was just talking about, how the judge changed
Yeah.
the punishment or whatever. God is not like that.
God, well,
You think he is?
I don't know. I'm just saying, you
Did
made a
you ever see the
statement.
movie The Green Mile?
Yeah.
Did you ever see the movie The Green Mile? At the end, Big John Coffey, he didn't commit the murder, right? But at the end, he gets electrocuted. I was still satisfied at the end of the movie
Why?
because it all worked out still. And that's kind of, I don't know, if you get my analogy, it's like that's God's justice.
Yeah.
That's God's justice.
Yeah.
True justice would be John Coffey wouldn't have been
Yeah.
electrocuted because he didn't commit the murder,
Yeah.
but he still died.
He still died.
Things worked out in the movie, right? The real evil murderer died also. Do you get my sense?
I do.
It's a weird analogy, right?
No, I get it.
Right.
It's a mystery. It's like, okay, that's not the way I would do it, or that's not exactly the way. But there
And
was
in actual
something-
justice,
there's
he
something
did-
holistic about
yeah,
it.
he did not commit those murders, so he should not have been executed. But it worked out. And sorry about it.
It's good. It's good. I want to
Not going to stand
what
out.
you said.
Spoiler alert! Oh, man!
It's still worth watching.
Sorry.
It's a great movie.
You still want to see it, by the way, it's only been on cable 50 times, and I watched it 48 times.
It's a great movie. It's a great movie. Yeah.
If you haven't watched it by now, I don't know. You must have small kids.
Well, let me tackle the question you raised. You said, but God is not like that judge. Right? Is that what you said?
No, because he judges evil as evil.
As evil. Okay, let me offer an alternative. In the world that the Bible presents to us, if God does what Mike said that judge did, then we'd be obliged to say that that defines justice and start rethinking it. We don't have an external referent to compare God with. We'd have to say, if God did just what Mike's judge did, that's justice. And we've got to now start figuring out, what does that justice mean? That's the difference.
Okay.
Does it make sense? That's the only way we know what is right and what is wrong is by God's character and his actions. That defines that whole world for us. Okay? So, number 7, and here's where we turn the corner into a place that might provide some degree of relief, maybe. We, however, are completely unable to execute God's judgments righteously. How do you feel about that? I'll just pause for a moment. Does that seem intuitively obvious, or do you contest it?
I was just thinking, kind of tying the use word tainted.
Tainted, that's right. That's what Mike picked up
Just as I
on.
was thinking through this, and
Yeah.
just back to arguing with God and saying,
Yeah.
ultimately, I want God to just judge. I don't want to have to be used as his.
Right.
So, like, in even disciplining your kids or confronting anybody, if I have to confront Eric, the first thing I do is pray.
Yeah.
Holy Spirit convict him, Holy Spirit
Yeah.
convict him, because anytime I confront,
Yeah.
I just feel inherently guilty.
Yeah.
Because there's a part of me involved in it
Yeah.
that's kind of like, did I just take it that one step too far like Moses and I hit the rock?
Yeah.
You know, and that.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
just that I'm never going to do it. Ideally, I want Eric to feel conviction. You know, part of that's just I don't want to confront him.
No, you're anticipating
But,
exactly where we headed.
you know,
Absolutely
that,
not.
that part, because I'm going to screw it up somehow.
Yep, you are.
You know, and
You're
you always feel
absolutely
guilty.
Yep.
Not guilty, but you. Anytime you confront, you're bearing somebody else's burden.
Yeah.
There's an inherent part of you that just resents it, and there's all that ego and everything tied up in it. And you feel like, you know, which is why I think when elders confront, you pray, okay, search your own heart first
Galatians 6.
before you go.
Yeah.
You know, just to make sure you're cleaning
right.
the house, you know, figuratively speaking.
It's very, very much true.
My judgment might be if I like him, my judgment would be different if I like her and I don't like Tom.
Yeah. Chances are good. That's what the judge in my courtroom.
That's terrible. Use a different metaphor.
I didn't want to say I didn't like somebody else. He knows I like him.
I want to know what Mike was on trial for. What was the sentence?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's actually a funny story because I had done something I felt like was being punished to too great of a degree based on the way I understood it. So I was going to argue.
and there we go.
Well, that's what's funny it was in Texas, and they have, maybe it's in Ohio too, where the first time you have an offense, you can take defensive driver class and avoid the whole thing, penalty and points and all that. And so I go to make my case, and he says, he's like Judge, he's an older guy too, he's always looking over his glasses. 35 people in the room, he goes, I'm going to have you take defensive driving. In Texas, you can only do it once. He goes, he heard the case, he's like, okay, I'm going to have you do defensive driving. And I said, I've already taken defensive driving. And he said, I don't think you're listening to me. I said, I'm going to have you take defensive driving. I was like, yes, sir.
That's a good one.
I'm the judge here. What are you doing? You know, I'm like, I don't think you understand.
Yeah. So we are not able to execute God's judgment righteously. It's just one more consequence of sin that pervades us. Typically what happens is becoming an instrument of judgment tempts us into a lifestyle of violence and corruption. Sometimes you're cranky, and you take it out on those you need to render just judgment towards, right? You get a sense of this in Joshua. There's a sense in which the way Joshua executes the king of Ai, for instance, impaling the guy, you know that? Put up a stake and impale him till sunset. That was very typical of the Bronze Age type violence that was common in the lands around where they lived. So Joshua had really adopted the ways of the world around him to execute God's judgment. That's the record. The fascinating thing about the Bible is so often it'll tell you something and doesn't tell you what it thinks about it. We simply assume that that's what he's supposed to then agree to. No, sometimes it's just there. Let me give you a really powerful instance of this just judgment. John 8, let's read that story. You're familiar with the story, but early in the morning, Jesus came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. Once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. So when Jesus says, Let him who's without sin cast the first stone, he's saying three things, at least three things. One, first of all, he's bringing everybody down to the same level. Here they are saying, listen, she is an adulterer. I'm not an adulterer. We caught her in the crime, so we need to execute her. So the first thing he's saying is, listen, all of you on the same level. Right? So, second, he makes the very deep and subtle point that even though the law of Moses commands stoning, they who stone have got to make sure that they're executing judgment without it coming from a place of sin within them, or being shaped or guided by their own patterns of sin. Because otherwise, and this ties in with Gary's question, otherwise executing judgment, God's judgment, will only bring judgment upon those who execute that judgment. You follow that? If you carry out God's judgment from a place of sin or brokenness within you, then you incur judgment on yourself, which is what Jesus means when he says, Judge not, that you be not judged. In other words, when you judge, even though that's what you're supposed to do, you bring judgment on yourself for all the ways in which you don't handle it well.
How could we ever judge with having a completely pure heart?
That's right. That's the question we're driving to. That's the question we're driving to. In fact, this is what happens in Galatians 6. Paul writes to them and says, if someone is caught in sin, let those of you who are mature handle the situation gently and carefully, looking to yourself lest you too be tempted. Remember that? He's pointing to the stuff that we're getting to here, is when you and I have to exert judgment in any situation, you've got to check your heart and do the very best you can of clearing your heart of all the taint. And at the same time, perhaps saying to God, I'm in trouble here. My best efforts are flawed, so have mercy on me as I exercise judgment in this situation. It's a very fraught command to exert judgment. So that's the second thing. He's saying, first, he flattens everybody. We're all on the same level of sin. Second, he says that don't exercise judgment unless it can come from a pure place within. And third, therefore, there is only one person present there who can actually exercise judgment, Jesus himself. All that's going on in that little phrase. And what he says bears fruit, because starting with the oldest, because the older you get, the more comfortable you are with the fact that you're pretty broken. Starting with the oldest, they all walk away. Doesn't make sense. This is crucial. We're going to build on this idea a little bit more, this idea that exercising judgment puts us into the place of being judged.
Can I ask you a quick question on this passage?
Yeah.
Biblical scholars. Why the emphasis on the writing in the sand?
No clue. Everyone has a theory on it. Yeah, Billy Graham's line was that he found the 10 Commandments on the ground, For all we know, he's just doodling. We don't know. No clue. It's...
Have you ever heard anyone say maybe he was writing the names of some of those men?
That's possible too. Yeah.
She committed adultery. It was with some other man.
Yeah, I don't know. That's Jesus for you. You don't know what he's up to all the time. Yeah. In fact, that's the one place in Scripture that you can point to say that Jesus was literate. Apart from that, you really don't know if he actually knew how to read and write. I mean, he read from Isaiah, but the writing. So there's a sense in which Jesus changes this game of judgment altogether. He deepens the qualifications of a judge in such a way that it's then evident that God and God alone is the only one who can judge without taint. In fact, in the Old Testament, and this is important to know, in the Old Testament, judgment and righteousness are one and the same concept. So for a judge to be a good judge, his acts must be righteous. Righteousness and justice are very connected in the Old Testament. There's no difference between them. So to judge is to act in righteousness, which then makes it all clear, right? If you judge without righteousness, that's not justice. You get a practical sense of the problem of righteous judgments. And Doug, you mentioned this earlier when it comes to parenting. Oh my gosh. We're called to guide our children into God's ways, and we have authority over our children, and we have to discipline them as may be needed. And it is utterly crucial that we exercise this authority and judgment from a place of righteousness. And righteousness, the way Jesus defines righteousness, is self-giving love. In other words, if you and I as a parent righteously, then we've got to figure out how to use our authority over our children, not as an outlet for our frustration, which I would say 9 times out of 10 it is. Or our own feelings, our own pride. Maybe our children do something dumb in front of others and we feel shamed by that, and so our response is shaped by that feeling perhaps. Or our own desire for control, our own issues with anger. The problem with parenting is that we're given this enormous authority as very broken people. And very early on, when I was still single, a guy who mentored me said to me, when you have kids, here's the first thing you do. 10 times a day you apologize to them. You go to them and say, I'm really sorry for what I did. And I found this to be true. The more transparent I am with my children about my brokenness and the fact that I'm still supposed to somehow exercise authority and judgment, but it's flowing from a pretty broken place in me, then the more honesty there is in our relationship, if that makes sense. But unconsciously we feel that to admit our own brokenness is to cede moral authority. You know what I'm saying? So, to cede our own moral authority. To say that I'm broken to our children then removes from me the capacity to speak judgment with weight. We think. That's right. It's completely wrong. That's what we think. And so we're nervous about going to our children and telling them that in our best moments we are pretty broken. And yet, it would seem that that kind of honesty might produce a result far better than a black and white, I'm right and you're wrong kind of approach. What do you think about that?
Where were you 20 years ago?
Learning all this. I took my son out 2 years ago. Micah turned 21 end of this last year. He and I are really tight, very close. I took him out a couple of years ago, had Hannah with me, and I said, Micah, I want you to tell me all the ways I failed you as a dad. Lay it out. Because I know I tried, but I failed in countless ways. And then I said, Hannah, you should listen to this because I'm going to screw up with you too. This is how it is, man. And it was really good. He had a number of thoughts, but they all coalesced into him saying to me, wanted me to be grown up before I was. He made me take decisions that I was not prepared for, that I wanted you to do for me. And I was listening and thinking, oh my gosh, I did that thinking I'm respecting you. Because I thought I was doing this to him. And he said, no, it created anxiety in me that I carry to this day. And I was like,
You'll be all right. You'll be all right. You can't break it.
You can get two coming still.
Whenever I would apologize to, or there was one particular time that I apologized to Spencer. He's our oldest and the biggest handful, but the sharpest knife in the drawer. He says to me, he says, yeah, but you need to make sure you keep doing your job. Something like that. It was like he could sense the insecurity.
wow.
The insecurity. He's like, but yeah, okay, you can say you're sorry, but you can't stop.
Yeah.
You can't let that stop you. He says, we're in trouble if you don't.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah.
That's the
You got
two-edged
it.
sword, isn't
You
it?
got it,
That
yeah.
really is
Yeah,
it.
he could feel his own insecurity
That's right.
coming about in that apology because he was thinking it was going to do exactly what you're saying. So it means, oh, that means I'm going to stop being your parent
Yeah.
because I'm wrong so often. And he's like, you can't do that.
What's really cool is one time I was as broken as I've ever been, was paralyzed. And my son came around me every day and just like you've had me, I got you. It was really, really powerful.
Very powerful. Very powerful. What Mike just said about his son, what he said is incredible because in our moments of weakness, there's still a place for those that we exert authority over to say to us, don't stop doing what you're doing. That's still needed. But there's utter transparency that there's a broken person exercising authority and a broken person receiving it. And there are feelings on both sides and they all know it. Right? So I say all this because this is utterly relevant to how you lead. This is real R, right? There's an L in there. Utterly critical to how you lead is the fact that when you take up leadership, you incur judgment right off the bat. James talks about teaching in James 3. He says, let not many of you become teachers, lest you incur a greater judgment. So all of this says that God's judgments are just. God expects us to exert judgment. That's part of how He created us. We are broken, and we can't really do that really well. So then that demands of us an utter dependence on Him, and utter awareness of the brokenness of our own heart, and an utter transparency towards those we lead about our own failings. Is that fair? That would change things at a level that would be astounding, wouldn't it? I mean, if church leadership functioned that way, if we were simply people saying, listen, I'm just as screwed up as you are, honestly. It's not like I'm somewhat better than you. And yet, I have a responsibility here. You've done something that I need to come to you to point out so that we can move towards holiness together. And I'm not sure how to do this in a way that is right and just, because I'm sure my stuff is going to come out in it. But I'm going to take a shot at it. And we'll see where this goes. Imagine that as opposed to some other ways that it can be practiced, for instance. Because of our brokenness, when we are offended and someone has done wrong to us, then we go to them and confront them with the wrong they've done to us. And they apologize to us. We will find ourselves needing to apologize to them for the way we brought the matter to them. Does it make sense? So, okay. What do you think about all that?
I have to remind myself that just because I screwed up doesn't make it okay for you to screw up. I did something really, really dumb, but because I'm in this position as a dad, I can't let you do that same dumb thing and not have consequences.
There's honesty there.
Yeah. So I'm not saying I didn't do it,
Yeah.
but just because I did it doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
And I can't allow you to do something wrong just because I did something wrong. Because then we're on a downward slide that's never going to stop. I'm going to get to a big my guilt up front.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable with a certain level of, maybe this is a similar question, are you comfortable with a certain level of humility or vulnerability with the people that you're responsible for or that you're leading or that you have some authority in? Does it work? Does it not work?
It works. I have an example where my son, his first year of college, his first semester of college, yes, didn't go as we all planned, I guess I would say. And this is when my dad was still alive. So he and I had a talk, right? My dad's like, well, did you ever talk to him about your first semester of college? I'm like, the ego wouldn't allow me to. So,
Yeah.
so we had a second talk, which was much, much better than the
Oh,
first
right. That's a perfect example.
Some of those, so our oldest is extremely strong-willed. He's 19 now, so when he was little, he was just a hellion. So I asked, my dad gave me his copy of James Dobson's Strong Little Childhood, where it's all highlighted, and I'm calling him, go, really? Is that that? So
What's with all the highlights?
Yeah, he's going, hey, Karma, you know, yeah, so.
That was nice of your dad to give you
Yeah.
that copy.
Exactly. He gave me that copy. You know, so in one of my worst parenting moments with Cole, he had said something that just really got under my skin. I said, that's it. I'm just done being your dad. You want to go find another dad? That's fine. So Nicole's in the other room with Alec, who was like 3 at the time. And he goes, oh, Daddy's not going to be our dad anymore? Could we have Jaren's dad? After which I said, so Nicole, what are you and Jaren's dad doing? But we just kind of have memorialized that moment as stupid dad moment,
absolutely.
where that was totally ego.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't know if the kids remember it totally,
Yeah.
but Cole he still brings that up.
Yeah.
When I apologize, he's like, yep, you don't need to be my dad anymore.
Yeah. Beautiful thing with parenting is that no matter how much you and I screw up, we can always go back and name it and humble ourselves and ask for forgiveness. And there's a resilience to that it might take a couple of conversations, but you know.
I would say that depending on the situation,
Yeah.
You know, different parts of your life, your family, your children, work.
Yeah.
A little bit of discernment on what you share and how much you share
Right.
is probably
Yeah.
something you ought to take into account.
Absolutely.
Although I would say you should err more on the side of humility. You know, let people know you're vulnerable. Let people know what your issues are.
Yeah.
And I've gotten much better at that at actually work. You know, I leaning in on this more on the family side much earlier in my life, and it's made stuff better with my kids and my wife.
Yeah.
Thank God. But I'm surprised at how much better my work life is when I talk to my direct reports just in a very casual, easygoing way and say, you know what? Start like reviews with, let's talk about last year. What is it that I did that didn't help you very much, or what is it that I can do next year that'll help you better, instead of focusing on what they did.
Right.
It's like, what is it that you need from me next year to help you do better? And it just like totally changes the topic.
Yeah.
It turns it from this is what you did well, this is what you did poorly, grading scale, to more of a how are we going to get better as a team.
So we are simply unable to be God's agents without that power corrupting us. That's the summation of this. Power we are given to exert authority over anybody else partners with sin within us and finds ways to either cover over our sin or manifest that sin in a justified way using the power that's been given to us. That's the natural tendency. So power is a dangerous thing, and yet we need to exert it. Okay? Number 8, I'm going to skim through that real quick. In Jesus, God is fully revealed. And when God said Jesus, he said all that he wanted to say. There's no more to be said. God's word, right? So in Jesus, then number 9, we discover the final and complete solution to this insane quandary that we've been exploring today. I want to think this through carefully with you. Hebrews 9:15, therefore Jesus is the mediator of a new covenant. The old covenant between God and Israel was a good covenant, but was essentially doomed to fail because it was an agreement between a holy God and an unholy people. It's bound to fail. The new covenant is different. Listen to Hebrews 8 describe it. The ministry that Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator, is superior to the old one. Since the new covenant is established on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I'll establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I'll put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the old one obsolete. And a covenant is essentially an agreement between two parties. And the mediator, this is a critical word for us, a mediator of the covenant is someone who takes on the responsibility of fully representing both parties. Okay? Fully representing both parties. Justly, fairly, perfectly. And then ensuring that all the requirements are fully kept. That's what a mediator does in this context. Make sense? You fully represent both parties and you make sure that everything is done rightly. So when Jesus becomes that mediator to us of that covenant, so on the one hand, Jesus keeps the law perfectly. He is the one who loves God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and he is one who loves his neighbor perfectly as himself. So he fully is able to represent God in this transaction, right? But he also has to represent a world that has comprehensively failed the covenant. He has to fully represent that side of the table as well. And this world, according to the covenant, must die. So here's what's going to have to happen. God's judgment has to be rendered justly, and the world is going to have to be put to death because of the violation of the covenant. And Jesus' mandate is to make all that happen perfectly. So the way he does it, he does two things. He takes upon himself the sin of all the world. As the mediator, he says, I am the mediator, I represent this world, I'm going to take all of their sin upon myself. And then second, I'm going to represent God completely and perfectly here, so I'm going to take upon myself the responsibility of executing justice justly. Okay? So far so good. And he does this, all of this, by willingly going to the cross for us, taking our sin upon himself, and then executing judgment on himself. So listen to how in John 10 he describes it. For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life, that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father. So Jesus is the one, in a sense, who executes himself. Does that make sense? You know, there's no point blaming the Roman soldiers. No point blaming the Jews. There's no point, you know how anti-Semitism so often is based on some of these ideas. But it's Jesus representing the Father. It's not even the Father. There are some people today who say that the cross is a manifestation of child abuse. The Father putting his Son to death. You know, what is it? No. Justice is served here because the Son, the mediator, takes upon himself all the sin of the world and then takes upon himself the role to execute justice, and therefore he lays his life down. Utter justice is accomplished on the cross. And so when Jesus says on the cross, it is finished, it is really finished. Because the judge and those judged have come together in one person, and justice is fully done, accomplished there. So Ephesians 2, we read, you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, raised us up, and seated us with him in heavenly places in Christ, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace and kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you've been saved through faith. So the heart of all this is that on the cross, in the gospel, what is happening is that the mediator takes upon himself the brokenness of the one party and takes upon himself the job of executing judgment of the other party, and it all comes together, right? Well, here's a insane thing. This is the model for how we are to practice judgment. That's where it gets really complex. Do you hear what I'm saying? Give an example, Philemon. So Philemon, you know the story, right? So this guy is a slave, and he runs away. And then Paul discovers him, and he comes to faith while Paul is in prison at that point. And now a runaway slave deserves death. That's the law of the land at that point. And so now he's sending Philemon back to his owner, Onesimus. And Paul takes on the mediator role in this. He takes upon himself Onesimus, and he takes upon himself Philemon. He says, listen, this guy's become dear to me. Treat him like you would treat me. And don't forget that you owe me your very life as well. So I'm representing your grievance, I'm representing his repentance, and in me, forgive. That's the basis of what he's saying. What do you think about that? If that's a model for how we exert judgment.
What's another example?
I'm trying to think of an example.
I was
Let's say
thinking,
your son borrows your car and totals it. What do you do?
I can actually speak to this.
I may have picked this. So the old model of leadership and of justice is that I'm the judge, you're the one being judged, right? And so then you can exert power or do whatever. Here, what Jesus has done is collapse the two into you. So now when you exert justice over someone who's been caught in sin, he's saying to you, you need to take that upon yourself. What does that even mean? And you need to take upon yourself the judgment of God. And somehow in you, justice must be served and mercy accomplished at the same time. So what would that look like in practice? Because, I'll tell you this, the dominant models of leadership are still very much not mediatorial.
You know,
I'm writing you wrong, and I'm going to make sure you know it, and I'm going to fix it.
So,
I'll do it nicely.
I'll do it nicely.
I'll do it humbly.
I'll do it humbly.
But I'm going to execute the judgment.
That's right.
so I have to try to assume some role in the reconciliation.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
You're onto something. Yeah, yeah.
The fact that I'm judging you,
Yeah.
number one, I should be in a position where God wants me to judge you. I need to be that person.
Yeah.
but because I am broken and ugly just like everybody else, I have to point this out to you, but now it's up to us to work out the best way that we can be reconciled and you can be reconciled with what's going on.
Yeah,
I have to play a part in that.
that's right.
I can't just say, you're bad, go fix it.
That's right. That's right. Push that even further. In exercising judgment over someone, you must first become their advocate. That's what a mediator is. You've got to get into the shoes of what went down, understand it, and come to the situation as their advocate. And then you've got to look at God's heart and righteousness and come to it as his advocate as well. And somehow in you, this has to coalesce into just and merciful judgment. That is hard to do. We usually go one way or the other. We become the advocate so much that we let people get away with anything. Or we take on God's role so much that we are like, cutting and slashing our way through our responsibility. But to do both is not easy. I don't have any simple answers to it. All I'm saying to you is that this is the model given to us. This is the gospel. This is the model of leadership. This is the model of parenting. This is the model of relationship. This is what's given to us.
One practical that Mike preached on one time, and I've never forgotten it, and I've never not tried to do it, and that is, if you go to somebody and you, like one of my best friends left his wife, shacked up with somebody. I mean, this was just unheard of for this guy. And one of the things you preached on one time was, if you go to them and talk about truth, confront, whatever, don't just do it and then be done with it. You have to keep loving that person. And so every time I go to Florida, I try to see him hard. It's not easy. I don't even enjoy it anymore. But that's not the point. The point is to continue to love him. He's confessed. Still very difficult. I used to meet with this guy every week for 21 years. And then all of a sudden he goes and does it. He's an elder. He was my go-to guy.
Because he has done you harm.
Yeah,
He's hurt you.
Yeah.
You're not just intervening on behalf of somebody else.
Yeah,
That's
but
the
the point is,
Yeah,
my
right.
role is to still love,
That's right.
reach out,
It's hard,
initiate,
yeah.
be proactive, rather than saying I don't have to think about it.
Right.
And that really spoke to me one time when he preached on that. I went,
Yeah.
I got to change my life.
Yeah. Yeah. In order to lead justly, in order to exercise judgment justly, you have to first become the advocate of those who are being accused. Until you can be fully that advocate, you're not in a position to judge justly. That's one implication. Right?
We've seen the movie Liar Liar. See that movie with John Kerry? He's a lawyer, and what happens? He comes under some spell somehow
His son has a
that he
wish
cannot
to be-
tell a lie.
Oh, awesome.
So he's saying all these true things, but what's happening is he's showing his true colors. He's speaking truth, and he has to face what is true inside of him.
Yeah.
The reason he lied was to cover over how bad he was. There's this great point that illustrates this perfectly.
Okay.
And he's a lawyer, so the judge, and he's disrupting court, and the judge goes, I'm going to hold you in contempt of court. And he goes, I hold myself in contempt of court. It's a great moment where he realizes, I deserve to be held
Yeah.
in contempt, which it was that exposure of his true colors.
Yeah.
I find the hardest part about this is when the advocate, the one you're advocating for, or humbling yourself, doesn't understand and can't embrace the authority that I have
Yes.
as well.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part,
Oh, yeah.
is that then they'll either take advantage of
Yeah.
that, or they just don't respect the other half of it.
Yeah.
They forget that,
Yeah.
I'm humble. I am truly humble. I am advocating for you. But there's this role that I have,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
either they rail against that, or they're very hurt by it. It almost feels like a bait switch. Oh, I thought you were my friend. You were
Yeah.
humble, but then you're still gonna.
Right. You still have to do what your
Yeah,
role requires
that's the
you to do.
hardest part
Yeah.
for me, is when that advocate is immature
Yeah.
on some level,
Yeah.
and they don't know how to handle.
They feel like if you're their friend, then you agree with it.
Yeah, if you're humble, and you're
Right.
advocating, then
Right.
you're not going to administer the.
So if you think about that, right? So whoever you're trying to advocate for is taking advantage of you.
Yeah.
So Christ advocated for us, right? We're doing the same thing to Christ, and we're afraid people are going to do that. So we're taking advantage of Christ
Yeah.
because our world is using the same.
Well said. Well said. This is part of the reason that leadership is always best exercised in community. Because on our own, we're in trouble. There's even a reason that there's a husband and a wife to parent, and single parenting is so hard. Because together we can help each other through our blind spots. I always think I'm doing it right. I do, but I don't. I'm not. And then Jean would say to me, well, what do you think about that? So, in a sense, this is a kind of life that we're called to best be witnesses to the gospel. So being a witness to the gospel has become reduced to a propositional framework that we transfer to somebody else. But it really is to be a witness to Jesus, to be a witness to the gospel, is to live out what he did on the cross. That mediational role is what, that bit in Paul, like we looked at earlier when he talks about why would you go to court, remember that? He ends that, I put it in here, he ends that by saying, why not rather be wronged? Why do you want to gain what you think is just? You might as well be wronged. That's not a big deal. So there's that whole element of the use of power to come from underneath rather than to come from above. That is intrinsic to all this.
So, what is? I'm still thinking about the Deuteronomy verse. Like, what's the takeaway when we think back to Joshua?
Yeah.
In light of all this, like, how do we reframe that? Because, like, now we're talking about like present day judgment in our own lives.
Yeah.
And we've kind of stopped talking about killing people. And like, I don't know how to. What does God have for us in that verse?
I think that's a great question.
You know.
Yeah. I suspect it has to do with what came out earlier. Was that perhaps Joshua? This is just my opinion. That perhaps Joshua should have said to God, "I don't know how to do this. This is too much for me to do. You want me to go and do what? And given the condition of my heart, given who I am, I don't even know how to start doing this." And a whole different conversation might have started. Well, he chose to go ahead and do it. And the weird thing in the story is that he's still executing God's judgment and incurring judgment upon himself and his people. That's what's going on in the entire narrative. I don't think we are called upon to validate it as a model for us. In fact, I think we're called to question it and say there's an alternate way that this could have all gone down. And Joshua is a peculiar book. So some of the best theologians have always wandered away thinking, I don't know what to do with that one. It's terrible. It's, Now you have a lot of people heartlessly and without emotion saying, well, God said it, he did it, that's right, that's an end of it. Yeah. I'm not going to let my heart get in the way. I did this in another group not long ago, and there were folks in that group who said, when I asked them what do you feel about it, I don't feel anything. I feel a joy in doing in God's will. So you feel a joy in killing people? Yes, I would. At that point, I didn't really know what to say because I thought, I don't know what to do. This is a whole other discourse we need to be in at this point. So I think personally, this is just me. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Just my opinion. I think Joshua should have said, "Are you kidding me? I don't know how to do this." And then maybe another journey could have started, like Moses arguing back, like Habakkuk arguing with God, getting clarity, like Abraham, all those. That's how I think we should go. So I mean, this gets really practical. What would it mean to be advocates of ISIS? Right? Because I think the model here demands that we try to get to that place. This is intrinsic to Jesus saying, turn the other cheek, because the underlying meaning is, someone strikes me, I strike them back. Right? Turn the other cheek means the strike that I was going to do to you, you can give that one to me as well. So the mediator is present. Do you see what I'm saying? Walk the second mile. You made me walk 1 mile, so I get to make you walk a mile. No, I'll walk another one. So that's that mediator taking on himself the cause of the one he's confronting and paying in his person the price. That's the logic behind those statements. So I don't know what it means to advocate for ISIS. I don't have a clue. But I think it's something we ought to think about. I think raw violence, all it does is brings judgment on yourself in the guise of exercising judgment on somebody else.
Here's the read I've taken on people in general in this topic is when you advocate for sacrifice or taking the second strike yourself, it's a good example. When you turn the other cheek, it's seen as two things. One, it's weakness. And secondly, the general sense is it doesn't work. There's a lot of the posture in society these days is one of victim.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of victims. If you ask a victim to turn the other cheek, they will tell you that is utterly wrong. Because I've
done that.
I've done that. I've been damaged, and I can't. We had the same conversation. We talk about things, the ways they handle evil, right?
Yep.
You can either evil it back,
That's right.
try to contain it, or absorb it.
Yep.
Anybody who's been victimized, and anybody who takes on a posture like that or views that, if we don't really believe, this is my thing, is we don't really believe that Jesus' way works.
Mm-hmm.
We do not believe it.
That's right. We don't.
We do not believe it.
Don't believe
There's no tough love in that, so
Right.
there will no be. If you just continue to absorb it, that
right.
person will never learn.
Yeah.
They'll never be confronted. They'll never suffer the judgment that they deserve.
That's right.
We don't believe that it'll work.
That's right. We don't.
And it certainly it depends on what you're asking. What's the ask? Right? To exaggerate, to make a point, I think it would be very difficult to ask Jews to, trust those people who are telling you to march down towards those chambers. Just take another one for the team.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Turn the other cheek. No.
Well, but to stretch the point, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what God asked Jesus to do.
Right.
And he was a Jew, and he did walk down toward that chamber and willingly did it and saved the world. So it's.
I know.
I get it. I get it.
But would you do it?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's the exact tension. Is we see that
How far
as
do you go?
wrong, and that there is only a certain degree. It's just like the woman, just like the John 8. Go and sin no more. The theological question is, how many times would Jesus say that until he finally says, you know what? No more grace for you. How many times?
Yeah.
And to what degree? And how far? And it's like, no, if it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
You just, now, I feel like the better thing is, I can't ask them to do it. I've heard someone say, hey, if someone held a gun to your head and said, or held a gun to your son's head and said, denounce your faith, would you do it? I'm like, no, I would punch you in the mouth.
Yeah.
Right? But if you held a gun to my head and said, denounce your faith, I wouldn't do it. But you're talking about my son. That's not, my job is to protect you. It's like, I can't ask you to do it, but every single person has maybe not the obligation, but at least the opportunity to absorb, to defer, to turn the other cheek. And when they do, to trust that God's judgment is going to come righteously at some point or the end, irrespective of the fact that I didn't deliver it. We just don't think that works. That's the general sentiment I get from, and that's what I feel rising up in myself too. I'm right there in that with everybody. That's what I feel is like, this person needs to feel, they need a little pop right here, you know what I mean? It's like, particularly them, because they're so oblivious. You know? I'm just going to, little forearm shiver, and then I'll show some,
Like your judge example.
Yeah. But this stuff has messed me up like nothing else. I mean, as I've understood this and looked at my own life and my own parenting and leading, it has messed me up because it's incredibly hard in real time to practice this. Sometimes in retrospect, I can think back and go, oh, I could have done that. But in the moment, other things are going on within me. And I certainly don't have this figured out. I feel like I fail in this 1,000 times over every day. And I'm utterly convinced that this is the way. It's like this it's clear, this is it. I'm just not sure how to do it in many situations. And I'm learning, I'm trying to figure this out. I suspect that this is the witness of the church that has gotten lost. There's a reason that we're not very influential, because we're not that different. But this is intrinsically different at a level. This presupposes that final justice is not going to be seen in this life. Right. That's the whole point of all this, is that there is an eternity. There is something else that we live in hope of. Not that it's all going to get figured out here. So if I take the second slap, if I walk the second mile, it feels horrible within me. I can do that because I'm trusting in a God who's going to sort it all out. But if our entire view is, how can my life here and now be maximized? Then this stuff is like whatever.
Is there any room for that we have a responsibility on this earth to do justice?
Absolutely.
And sometimes justice
Absolutely.
means protecting the weak.
Absolutely.
Sometimes protecting the weak means exerting violence.
Yeah.
That's kind of the marina.
I see where you're going, yeah.
Right.
As long as you can take on the full advocacy
I
from the other
that's-
side.
Yeah, I understand.
As long as you can advocate for both sides fully and fairly, then you're executing justice in the fear of God with a trembling.
It's both,
It's both.
right? Mediator, both parties fully. But here's what I feel like you said earlier that we need to revisit is, even when you do both, we cannot execute judgment. We have to keep remembering, I cannot execute judgment without it being tainted.
Yes.
Without it being perfect.
That's right.
So, if you're going to step into that role, you will be judged.
That's right. That's right.
And you will be found wrong. Right? Even when I do my job,
As best you can.
right? So I apologize to my kid. I'm sorry that I did that. And now I execute the authority. I will do this wrongly. And I'll be judged for it. I will need a mediator.
That's right.
Every time I mediate.
That's exactly right. And so everything we do has to be washed in the gospel, because without that,
Right.
we will lose hope, we get paralyzed. But because we do, then we take these steps.
Okay. Can I take a break? Probably I'm glad it didn't snow.
I'm glad it didn't snow. It's not really snowing.
Oh, is that
We were all worried.
Let's take a break.
So do y'all know Chris Kelly? Chris Kelly is our executive pastor. Fairly recent assignment, less than a year. He's been around for maybe 5 years.
7.
Wow.
7.5.
Well, I mean on staff. How long on staff?
Oh, staff. A little less than 5 years.
Yeah, so around for a little over 7, on staff a little less than 5. I recognized the pastor when he came on staff 5 years ago, helped launch the Hilliard campus, and then after that, we pulled back on that. He rolled back into some other administrative roles, and then started to emerge as someone who could organize us on a larger scale, like we needed at the time. So pulled him into the executive pastor role about a year ago. He's doing a great job. And I don't know exactly what you have on his docket this morning, so I can give an overview, but
You can do it.
huh?
You can do it.
Okay.
Sure.
You've asked him to share some things, cover some things.
I'm going to share some things, cover some things. Mike, jump in wherever.
Chime in.
This just went around. Did everybody get a copy of something? Anybody not get a copy of something? Is there something for John?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And you have a copy. So I sat over there a moment ago, and Tom said, something to the effect of, "So you're teaching next?" No, I am not teaching anything, and I'm certainly not following up the guy that was just here in any type of teaching capacity. So get that out of your mind. That is the wrong paradigm for this morning. And I have a moment of confession. So both of my sons are now in a season where they like to wake up in the middle of the night, do some kind of a night terror or a nightmare. My youngest, if he shows up and he scratches himself, he's in the middle of a night terror. And if you know anything about those, you actually can't wake up your kids. You just got to kind of, it's very weird. My other son is now having a reoccurring nightmare at 2:30 in the morning on the dot and likes to come in, and after some back and forth, he's on the floor. That story culminates in me being a bit fuzzy, and that doesn't translate into me having a lack of words. It just means my filter is a little thinner this morning. So already being a mildly, arguably more than mild aggressive personality, and for some of you that I hang out with, through multiple times of confession and repentance that I have issues. My filter's a little thin, but I might have me. But I have Mike
filter you.
and Gary, and it's good to have authority over you. It's a very Christ-like example. But let's just pray for a second, and then I'll kind of set the context of what we're going to talk about, and we'll just get right into it. All right? Lord, I just thank you for this time. I thank you for this class. I thank you for the leadership here at this church. Jesus, I just thank you that you are our King. I know that through all things you are ruling and reigning, and God, that your will be done in all things. In many respects, I know that's a mystery, and you call us to live out a mission. You call us to fruitful and meaningful work, and so we have work to do, and we strive to do that. But somehow, in this mysterious space, we know that your work will be accomplished according to your timing. So in the meantime, until Jesus, you return and present yourself as King right in front of our faces, we'll keep working and striving to glorify you, Lord. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. So I initially was thinking about doing a more formal presentation for you guys. But as I thought about who's in the room and just my developing view of leadership, especially the leaders here, I caught myself really thinking of you as fellow teammates, fellow staff members in a way. Only one of you is getting paid as a staff member, but as I started to think through that lens, I realized in order to cultivate a deepening sense of ownership, a deepening sense of partnership, I'm going to speak to you as if you are just an extension of this staff team. I'm going to share thoughts and information with you, knowing that as you begin to be exposed to that information and handle it, it actually will cultivate your sense of ownership here with us, your sense of partnership with us. So that's kind of the approach we're going to take. There's a couple of things, thoughts I'm going to share with you that we just rolled out this week with the staff team, first with the directors, and then just on Thursday with the overall staff team. And so you're getting this still fresh out of the oven. It's not dull yet, hopefully. And it's going to be my job to keep repeating some of these things. And so I'm going to be inviting you to repeat these things with me as we move forward. The word of the year is engagement. The reason that is the word of the year, and really in one flavor or another is going to continue to be the word that we operate around in many sense, is because over the last 3 to 4 months, much of my job, much of my transition into this role, partly me trying to refigure out me, trying to refigure out this church is, if you ever see me on a Sunday morning, if I'm not out front, I'm somewhere back in the shadows because I'm constantly observing, constantly asking questions, either in my own head or directly in conversation. And I often ask the same questions, and I just want to hear what people are saying, whether they're on the staff team or not, whether they're in leadership community or not, whether they're just a regular or somewhat regular attender of our church or not. I'll ask a lot of the same questions and I'll listen to a lot of the same stories. And what became apparent to me is two things that leave me actually very encouraged, really excited about this church and this community. One is it's not hard to find reasons to celebrate what God is doing in Vista and through Vista. I mean, I'm still reflecting on the stories that came out of the Christmas program. You know, one of the highest points of the year in terms of stories and connection and engagement. But being an operational guy, being a natural skeptic in some ways, I'm always looking for where do we need to close the gap? Where do we need to do better? What do we need to change? What do we need to let go? And so I also heard another pattern. A couple of leadership community meetings ago, we looked at a year-over-end trend data for our attendance, which is in a state of decline, technically speaking. I started having more and more conversations with our leadership and kids community. I started getting a sense of scarcity. You know, in kids community, there's always a struggle because the lift is so heavy, it's so broad. But I started hearing more and more that we're struggling with volunteerism or rates of volunteers, or even having qualified teachers and leaders in the pipe. And as I've gotten to know Sean Lee, the guy who's leading our worship and production space, I also started getting a sense of scarcity from him. He's struggling to find more capable worship leaders and people who can be a vibrant part of the music team as well. And again, I heard stories of mission, but also stories of a feeling of lack of mission. I've heard stories of discipleship, but also a feeling that we're not making disciples as well or as aggressively as we could. And so I know that part of this job is to take a hard look at those things and begin to work out solutions. And I know my school of thought is you don't get to where you are overnight. It's the accumulation of things over time. Sometimes there's some milestones you remember, and it's pretty easy to forget all the little things along the way. But likewise, if you're going to go from where you are to whatever the next chapter is, it's going to be an accumulation of small things over time. There might be some innovative moments that we remember in particular, but by and large, to go from one space to the next, especially from an improvement perspective, it is small things over time. And what that means is consistent focus, and that means discipline. And those things are hard to do because we are in a dynamic, changing environment. We serve a wild and just untamable God. And so there will be times that God says turn left, and our whole plan is we want to go right. But our answer is supposed to be yes in that moment. And so there's a place for our planning and our systems, et cetera, but I would just say we hold loosely to that. But until God says turn left instead of right, we're going to stay focused and disciplined. So back to why the word is engagement. Things like attendance or volunteer rates or giving or what have you, whatever data point it is, those, as far as I'm concerned, are just outputs. They're symptoms of something. And if you know anything about the theory behind input-output, it's a chain of things. An output has an input. That input is actually the output of another previous input and so on. But for the sake of this morning, attendance is not the problem, if I could use that as the example. The problem is we have gaps in our engagement. And something Bobby said reminded me about this model of advocacy and really assuming the weight of both parties. Because if our people are not engaging the mission, if our people are not engaging the needs of this church or our community, sure, there is a personal responsibility in there. We all have that before Christ. But I look at that and say, what is it that I didn't do as their leader? What is it that I didn't teach them about or equip them to do? Because it's really easy to point at someone and say, you're not doing something. It's a whole different exercise when you look at what someone's doing and to put yourself right in the middle of it. I was just thinking about my daughter. She said something that to a friend or in front of a friend, in front of me, that I know is not a reflection of who I believe her to be. And after I cooled down, because my normal reaction to everything is anger first, I realized I needed to start with confessing to her that as her parent, I made assumptions about the way I'm raising her. But I know darn well what I've said to her is not enough. She's watching me. She sees who I am as a leader in the family. And some of that is what causes her to act the way that she does. Because if I reflect in how I've talked to my wife or when we've had disagreements, she sees that. I didn't mean to teach my daughter anything in that moment, but she certainly learned something. So it has to start with we're in the middle of that, and we have to own that personally before we start to implement solutions. So the way I look at our staff team, the way I'm looking at everybody in this room, the way I'm looking at our leadership community is we are the leaders of this church. If we need to get better at something, it needs to happen right here first. We need to own that. Maybe that takes some time in the mirror first. And our reach is only so far. The exponential reach of Christ goes to the people that we are connected with, and then they in turn are going to connect with. But it does originate someplace, and God has called and appointed us to be the people who are leading other leaders to do likewise. So we just need to keep focusing on the right things, making sure as best as we're able to, making sure those right things are kind of pointed in the right direction, and just maintain focus and faithfully follow Christ along the way. So that's why I'm excited. I actually, coming into 2019, I have this distinct feeling that the right things are starting to get lined up in the right way, and it's our job to keep pursuing those right things and just keeping them lined up as best we can. So that's what I'm going to be inviting you into. There's some information we're about to run through pretty quickly. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt. Treat everything in this packet as wet cement. That's one of our favorite phrases around here. But some of these are actually going to be close to production, and you'll know for sure because something will be handed to you that's somewhat polished and looks like a piece that you can hand to others. But
Chris, do you have any more of those?
I do.
People around the same. Can I get some?
I have like 6. Oh, and I'll make sure digital copies of everything.
Give it to me and I'll put it in their folder.
Yeah, so this stuff will all be available in your folders as well. So with that, let's go ahead and look at this packet real quick. Everybody got one?
No.
I'll take care of it.
All right.
I'll take care of it.
So here's an example of leadership engagement. So we have the financial peace class. We haven't done stuff like that. We've been programmatic like that very much in our history. So we have this thing that you can get involved with, help you with your finances and values around that and practices. And we want a lot of people to be involved with that. The reality is, not a lot of people are going to be involved with that unless you grab them by the arm and drag them in there. But if every leader, let's just say with life groups, if every life group leader engaged financial peace, what would it look like next year when we do financial peace? Tons better, because the leaders would have engaged it. They would have recognized what it is. It doesn't mean that you're upside down your finances. It's just good, valuable stuff. And so if we skip over that step and just go, okay, everybody, do this. But we don't engage it as leaders, it doesn't really quite get going. But if you engage as leaders, you can feel there's a whole different attitude then about that. So next year when we say, hey, you should do this, what are the leaders going to be doing? They're going to be saying, that's come back around. I did it last year. You need to do it. They'll get 3 or 4 people in their group, right? That's what we're talking about, is that we've had a general laissez-faire engagement from the core, really. And so what we've been talking about as a staff is, as a staff even, we have to be even more engaged with stuff than maybe we have in the past. Is that a fair example?
I would say the same thing about life groups, that I'll take just Dublin as an example. I mean, there have been so many life groups. They're not as robust in terms of growth as you would anticipate. And so there's 50% maybe a few years ago that were in it. Might be a little less now. The question is, what about the other 50%? Is anybody thinking about that? Is anybody thinking about multiplying their life group? Is there anybody looking outside as opposed to inside? Do we want them to have the same experience that we enjoy? And I've asked people this in other churches, and they've said no. No, because I don't want to change. I don't want to open up. I don't want to. And many of us, leading a life group, facilitating a life group, is like what Mike said Sunday, in the I will. If you've been together for a long time, maybe you need to say, I will go out and lead another life group, or I'll do whatever. So it's that engagement of thinking outside of ourselves, as opposed to this is the way we kind of do it and it feels good.
Chris, can I ask a question?
Yes.
So Mike mentioned the thing about Financial Peace University, and this is also doing Grief Share. So those are outside organizations, their stuff coming into our stuff. What if somebody has an issue with us partnering with those organizations? So if we're doing Financial Peace University and if we're doing Grief Share, are those Vista endorsed things then? We used to call them community partners, or so then the theology of Financial Peace University, Vista, is saying we are in line with that theology.
I don't know if I would state it that way, as much as saying there isn't necessarily a conflict that would prevent maybe a different set of values in terms of onboarding folks that wouldn't otherwise come into our community, but they might entertain some proximity to a deeper community through something like Financial Peace.
And so if somebody was a leader and came and said, hey, I see you do Financial Peace University, I'm involved in this. Can we do that? Would that go through Lisa as a life support thing, or who do those requests come to?
I can imagine scenarios, depending on what that thing is, and if that person perceived it as something that might fit in the life support space, I can see someone coming to Lisa with that question first. What I'd like to see us as a staff team begin to continually get better at is that we as a team, and also leaders as well, we're equipped to have that dialogue in real time as best we can. And part of good equipping is knowing not just what to say, but also recognizing I don't have that information, and then who to connect that person to. So, depending on what the subject is.
So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, our life group wants to start Awana. We want to talk about having Awana.
Yeah.
Where does that conversation begin? Where do we take those people?
If there's a life group coach in that space, that would be the first stop. And if that person doesn't know that, then that would be another indicator of where we need to equip better. If there isn't a life group coach in that space, then the campus pastor would be the next stop along the pathway of information. And again, if that pathway is not clear, that's just more opportunity for us to get better. But regardless, if it doesn't go that pathway and it's some other relationship that's fielding that dialogue, it's just another chance for us to figure out how to make sure the right information is spread across the right population so that we can answer those types of questions a lot quicker. And if we don't have a good answer, well, let's come to the table and start to figure that out. There's very few things, in my opinion, that can come to the table that are somehow wrong. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a moral component that's an issue or an ethical component. It starts to get more into operational value sets and strategy and just resources and bandwidth and can we, and if we're going to, are we going to do it really well or not? Those are all things that would mitigate where that conversation ultimately lands. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't have the conversation. You know what I mean?
You've instituted most of the staff in a regular every week meeting. This is in addition to an all-staff meeting. That you talk about anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah.
I mean, if that came up, everybody would sit and talk about it.
Yeah, one of the really beautiful things about Vista is, though we're starting to adopt some corporate model pieces and parts, we certainly don't want to become a corporation or a business. That's not what we're here for. We are here pursuing the hearts and minds of people for the sake of Christ. It's a whole different paradigm. But what I also know is sometimes, though everybody has a voice, they don't necessarily have a vote, depending on what the situation is. But as much as we're able to, and we're still working on this, and we'll still get better at this, is if someone has something of value to put on the table, we want to have forums in which we can do that. And I know with the staff team, there were pockets, and none of them were inappropriate, where some people talked about some things and some people talked about other things. But for my own sake, to better understand the staff, I needed to have a meeting where I was hearing everybody say the same thing at the same time in front of the same people, so that I knew I didn't have to necessarily have the same conversations over and over again in different pockets. That was more for my sake. The unintentional positive consequence was some other folks in the room realized, oh, you're thinking about the same thing. Let's work through that together. And so that type of thing is cultivating in our culture as well. So, are we going to keep that meeting forever? I don't know. As long as it feels valuable, yeah, we will. Or maybe we change it down the road. So, any other thoughts or questions in and around that space?
I would just say, I took Financial Peace. I think it is fantastic. I've seen more life change come out of tools like that than anything else other than conversion. I mean, literally, people sell cars or do whatever God tells them to do. It's amazing. However, they're probably going to teach you the tithe. And I've been in churches where that's it, the tithe, thus saith the Lord. We teach New Testament, which says, give generously and sacrificially. And Mike will say regularly, the tithe, that's a great place to start. So it's going to be a little different from a theological perspective, but still very valuable. That's why we try to train leaders to think critically and not just go, well, everything's, exactly right.
Right, and that's a good example of, I have serious theological problems with Financial Peace University.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And as long as people are aware of,
sure,
and get training on that stuff, and are able to have a forum to talk about those things, then those are good things to pursue.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I admire about Mike's philosophy of leadership is, as much as he's able to, he tries to keep a big tent approach to things. What that means is trying to have a community that's accessible to as broad a number of people as possible. There's a center set that we all share in our faith, and then there's these other things that they create spaces of tension, and part of that tension is learning to just stay in that tension for the sake of having the broader community, the broader diversity, as much as we can in a way that doesn't dishonor the faith that we're pursuing together. But it's not easy, but I think it's well worth it, in my opinion. At least that's the way I feel about it. So this first, what should have been a slide up here, but I should have talked to Mike. Thank you. Next time around, we'll have slides, and I won't kill a bunch of trees and evict a bunch of squirrels from their homes. But though I'm talking about operational stuff, and the danger is operational stuff can become the point. If you know me, I'm constantly saying the phrase "Jesus is King." That's just my way of reminding myself and people around me that we're here for the sake of Christ. This particular scripture from Isaiah states, "Everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." This is another verse in my library where it reminds me that all that we do is for God's glory. And then, if any of you have read any of Jim Collins' books, basically all of them are fantastic, but Good to Great is arguably the most fantastic amongst the fantastics of his books. I like this quote from the book. When what you are deeply passionate about, what you can be best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine come together, not only does your work move towards greatness, but so does your life. For in the end, it is impossible to have a great life unless it is a meaningful life. And it is very difficult to have a meaningful life without meaningful work. Perhaps then you might gain that rare tranquility that comes from knowing that you've had a hand in creating something of intrinsic excellence that makes a contribution. Indeed, you might even gain that deepest of all satisfactions, knowing that your short time here on this earth has been well spent and that it mattered. To me, this is a business language that describes the race that we are running together in Christ, and the hopes that when we come to the end of our individual race, we hear that, well done, good and faithful servant. And I think we're called to the same race as a church and as a community as well. So let's look at the next slide, operational values. A little while ago, Mike put together a document. The working title is just high-level direction. It's a much more robust philosophical vision. I just took a piece of it, and then I actually further stripped down that piece to what seems like the minimum words, but still captures the heart of it. And we'll just read through this. And I'm calling these operational values because they aren't necessarily spiritual values. This would be, from an operational perspective, how you might manifest a deeper spiritual value. Responsive governance, rooted in Scripture, spirit, and community. Clearing the pathway for the mission of King Jesus. Proactive networking and partnerships locally, nationally, and globally. Catalytic operations supported by a dedicated staff. Aligned budgets and efficient systems that facilitate mission. An attractional/missional approach to church. Because our approach actually doesn't have a category that's otherwise known. We're doing something a bit different. And an oversimplified way of describing that is invitational public productions plus transformational community living. We always want to pursue having authentic, practical, gospel-centered teaching. We want to have a ministry focus, and that's across the board, on discipleship and transformation of all people. And what I spoke to just a little bit earlier, having personal ownership of a missional identity and lifestyle. Any questions or thoughts about any of those statements? Again, this is what cement. This is certainly not a published piece, so just like staff, you're getting a glimpse of something that nobody else gets to see quite yet.
Let me ask a couple questions. What do you think we mean by responsive governance? You know what governance is? It's the highest level direction for an organization, governance.
You went through that thing with us.
Yeah, just to think about the board. Right now it's the elder team. What does it mean to be responsive?
Listen.
Yeah. As opposed to what kind of governance? Unresponsive, which is like, which looks like what? Unresponsive governance is like regulated, right? It's got everything codified. It's wet cement, and this is it. No matter what, like the extreme would be, no matter what God says from this point on, we're doing it like this. It's really hard to have responsive governance because governance needs to set the tone for like a whole organization. So it is challenging to be responsive, but we want to be. We want our highest level leadership in the church to be the kind of leadership that has the capacity for the church to move and shift where God leads it. Otherwise, we become a relic. We become a monument. We become lifeless, right? If the top level can't respond. So it's hard, but we're challenged to do. Does that make sense?
Chris, you kind of skipped over that, but talk a bit about the difference between an attractional church and a missional church and what we're trying to do that is different.
Sure. Again, this is just my understanding of those different schools of thoughts around it, but attractional...
I have to keep correcting Chris on this thing.
That's fine.
He's the executive pastor, so this isn't just his opinion. What he thinks is what we're doing. And if I don't like it, or we don't like it, I'm going to fire him. But he has to keep owning it. It has to be, this is what we've lacked, is someone saying, we're doing it like this. So but unfortunately, in his first few years being at Vista, I was trying to teach him to be humble. And now it's coming back to haunt me.
Yes.
Because I want him to be strong and go, this is it. So
We have done that, though. Like you were the one who said, this is it, and that's the way we operate.
that's right. But I don't have the capacity to make what we know to be true work on a larger scale. And Chris does. He's been in that world, he's seen that world, and he's helping us take what we have always known to be true and press it out. But we're learning some new things, so I'm being a little bit silly here and joking. But what I want Chris's posture to be is, here's what we mean by attractional and missional, and this is what we're trying to do. Rather than deferring that a little bit, no, this is my opinion. We're trying to rally, and I'm asking the staff to rally around someone who has got a grip on what we believe.
I'm just sitting here assuming that whatever he says, you all agree to already.
That's right.
It's leadership.
That's right. That's right. So here's what we believe as attractional and missional Vista Community Church.
Yes, all that. This is what an attractional model is. It's basically come and see. It's Field of Dreams. You build the thing, and then you say, come and see it. Come hang out over here. And the trap is you got to keep building the thing. Because if you win people with that thing, they're happy for a season, and then they get hungry again. And you have to keep building the thing to refeed them because you won them that way in the first place.
You have to remain attractional.
Yep.
when the initial attraction begins to fade, you have to attract them again. You have to keep attracting.
Yep.
But there is something to that in our culture.
Sure. I mean, put it this way: you don't want to be unattractive, right? So there's a tension in there. But the lie
No,
is,
some people want to be unattractive, right?
Right,
Some
and they get
churches
what they
that don't
designed
want
for.
people coming in, right?
yeah, and they get what they designed for. And okay,
Some of us are naturally that way. It's just who we are.
We're learning to work
No,
around
I-
it.
Yes, I get that. That's funny, but there are churches who do not wish to grow. They
Oh,
do
yeah.
not wish to have people come in
Yeah.
and attend their church,
which is to say they intend to die. That is
or
their
they
intent.
intend to
They-
fill themselves.
Yeah.
Right, so we are not aiming at unattraction.
Right. But we are not aiming for the lie that is at the center of the purely attractional model. Okay? Neither are we taking the pendulum and swinging it way over to the other side and saying we want to be a purely, let's say, granola, bare feet only, purely missional church where we're constantly out there at the coffee shop and doing church that way. Now, I'm not saying, don't mishear me, I'm not saying those things don't have value. I'm not saying those things don't have a place in the kingdom. It's just not necessarily what we are purely pursuing here. We recognize that we are a suburban church in a suburban context for the most part. And if we're going to be good missionaries in our context, we have to think about who we are missionaries to. And that is the suburban society that we live in and among, and we are. So you can't have that pendulum go too far to either way because you're actually going to be missing the cultural heartbeat that we're supposed to be good missionaries to. So we're trying to figure out, we know the tension is in the middle someplace, and depending on what arena of operations or strategy or vision we're pursuing, that tension shifts a little bit. But in speaking with high-level consultants and other think tank type people, they have recognized in what Mike has been leading, what Gary has been leading, what the elders have been leading, what you as leaders have been leading, doesn't quite fit into previously defined categories of what church models have been. And so what that means is in many respects we really are carving a new path. The church is still the church. Jesus is still Jesus. The mission is still the mission. But something about the way we operate in our context is a bit like pioneering. And so that's what you guys are a part of. So that's what we mean.
We're trying to
But-
find this hybrid, is what our consultants tell us. You guys are really trying to work out an attractional, missional model, and it's fraught with tension. So that's the short answer for that.
So an example would be Willow Creek was a pretty attractional church, right? And what they discovered after many years of functioning, when they actually asked people, "Why is your life being transformed?" And you can read it. It's called a book called Reveal. You can read everything. They basically said, "We put all of these programs in place for people to be transformed, and they weren't transformed."
Yeah.
And so it was a tremendously vulnerable, revealing kind of thing. And so they were attractional and going, we need to switch over some systems that we put in place that we thought were what we were supposed to do, and they didn't work. So we're trying to be attractional as well as missional and transformational. So you'll hear Mike say, how are you being transformed? How's the life? And the most gratifying thing as a staff person is to see transformed lives, including our own.
Yep. And we're learning and relearning as we go. You know, a phrase I heard recently is you're building the plane as you're flying it. I love that one. But sitting in a space where we have a responsive governance structure and a humble flexibility built into the model as part of the heartbeat, I think we are well positioned as we go into this more exploratory phase through 2019. This is really a milestone year where we're transitioning from one chapter of the church to the next. So I'm thrilled, honestly, that you guys are here and that your fellow leaders who are not necessarily part of BLR, we're in the mix, because I look around and I just see tons of fantastic people, and we just get to get after it together. And I get super excited about that.
So on the attractional part of it, you said continue to build things to keep it attraction kind of stuff. And recently you've had a lot of skill lead the organization. Right?
Sure.
And I have a life group full of middle school and high school age kids. And you know, it was a shock to them that they lost a lot of the activities that their kids were part of. I know we're trying to do a high school life group and things like that, but I don't know if anybody's reached out. I've talked to them. I've shared some of the things that they shared with me with others to hey, how do we fill some of these gaps? But as we continue to make ourselves attraction, we think that will help with declining populations probably, you know, the whole engagement piece of it. Are there more plans in that space?
Yes. Part of it is there are certain things we realized that when those folks transitioned out, what transitioned out with them is not only their skill set, but a realization that so much of what was of value that those people brought was centered in and attached to them as a singular personality. It really wasn't a team-based approach to putting together those pieces and parts and then getting them into the community. And so, unfortunately, we have to learn and keep on learning the hard lesson of it wasn't necessarily wrong that it was set up that way when it happened, but it's simply not sustainable and we don't want to repeat that. So we have to feel the pain of that lesson as we go forward, because we know that kids and families and that whole dynamic, especially in a suburban context, it is a big deal. You can get everything right, but if you get that wrong, it just doesn't work. It's a thing, and there's things around it that are kind of gross and they kind of rub against our faith a little bit. But if we're going to be good missionaries in our context, we have to treat those things as real and then really do something about it. We're turning the corner where we're kind of recuperating from that. We still have Sean in the mix, and what's interesting about Sean is seeing him move out from the previous paradigm and really emerge as someone I didn't realize that he was. He is a far deeper and capable leader than maybe he had the opportunity to express before. And so there's that piece coming in. We onboarded Evan Ewell, which some of you may or may not know. He has a great mind for family ministry, and he's poured a lot and continues to pour a lot into our campus directors. And then on this next slide, actually, which is further evolution for the org chart from last year, we realized that our campus directors need some dedicated administrative support, coordination support, because their true skill set, which is more like pastoral leadership, because of just the administrative nature of running something like a kids community, they haven't been fully free to express that. So we're going to start fixing some of those pieces and parts, and so the value pieces for our families get better and get clearer. Are we there yet? No, we're not. Are we going to get there? Yeah, I think we are going to get there. Is it going to be this year fully? I'm not sure. But I know that by this time next year, there's going to be a ton more in the landscape that brings value and meaningful things to young families. Because we don't want young families just showing up and leaving. We want them to say, this is a valuable place for us to stay. And so we can get through those thresholds and bring them into deeper spaces of teaching and discipleship and heart transformation. Because we know they can go someplace with a lot of bells and whistles, but they may just stay in the veneer of that space and not get to the deeper heart transformative spaces that all of us need. So we got to figure out that puzzle and we're working on it.
Good. But at least they stay and they can continue to be influenced, right?
Yeah, retention's a big deal. Yeah, because if they're not here, they're not receiving it.
Exactly.
But
We have no chance, yeah.
But the hard thing about that is you have to have some type of attraction to get them
That's
essentially
attention.
to come back. I know at Dublin Middle School Ministry, the people that are complaining are not showing up.
Yep, people vote by absence.
Yes.
Tell me how to answer this question. Here's a short story. I'll summarize what he just said. We had the thing. It had no depth. It had no capacity to sustain. Either they were going to burn out, and they were burning out, or it was going to collapse and have no ability to scale. What Chris is doing better than what I have ever even hoped to do is build things with a strong foundation over time that have an ability to scale and survive. So it's going to take time. It was there, but it wasn't robust. It didn't have any depth. It didn't have buy-in. It didn't have ownership. In fact, it was a bit of a mess underneath. So now we're rebuilding. What do you do in the meantime? Do you just tell them we're rebuilding? Because we can't just give it.
Right.
There's no way to do that. You can't literally think, hey, just hire a new that so that on that particular night that happens. That's not it. As an organization, we've realized we've had to take other steps back that aren't as publicly noticeable, but we are slowly rebuilding some things under his leadership. What do you do in the meantime when you cannot serve that demographic?
I think we have to communicate it. Yes. Absolutely. I mean, they have to be in the know. If they're not in the know, they're going to think you're ignoring it and they're not moving, right?
And how do you do that? You send them a letter? What do you do? Like literally, what do you do? There's probably 10 or a dozen, right?
Yeah. Do they show up for the hangouts now? I don't know. I don't know where they're showing up.
And what do they know? Do they know enough and they just don't like it? Or do they not know? Do they need more information? Or do they need pastoring through the difficulty of it?
The latter. Because I know one family, if I haven't been at life group the last 3 life groups, if I haven't been at church the last month, they're probably Christmas. They're definitely Christmas program. So basically, I started this was for Gary. Every time somebody shows up for life group, you okay? Ditch. What's going on? Every time, I told him last night. Every time you don't show up for church, I'm going to text you.
Yeah, right.
I'm not keeping tabs. I just make sure you're okay.
Yeah, right.
It's the yes, I will.
Yeah.
But I think communicating with them and letting them know that we hear that you're hurting, and we're trying to figure it out. We don't know what to do yet, but we're figuring it out. Because you can't promise we're building something and not build it. Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to. If you don't know right now if you are actually going to build it.
Yeah.
You're going to do something, but you don't know what it looks like.
That's right.
But I think you got to talk to them.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you. I don't.
Yeah. Well, and you should.
I just need to know what to say.
Yeah, you should. That's right. Do you have more information now or not?
I have more information now than I had. Yes.
Yeah. I think what you'll run into is, even if you have the information, it doesn't resolve the issue.
It still hurts.
It either still hurts or you still don't have it.
Correct.
And so it's hard.
Yeah, but to your point, though, you've done two things. You've bridged the communication, the vacuum gap of, I don't know. There are probably some people who literally are like, well, I don't know. I don't know what the end state's supposed to be like. At least now I know there is a gap. It's going to be a period of time, and now I have to make a decision of, can I be comfortable to live through that gap?
Yeah.
And we can, hopefully we as a team can walk beside them, maybe come up with intermediate steps.
Sure.
maybe you can help fill that gap for a period of time with us.
Well,
You're the intermediate step.
I mean, one of the kids, he's like, I'm not setting my basement up so all the kids can do it we can play still. I'm like, how do I help you set your basement up? You know?
Yeah, I would call that engagement.
Yeah.
This is actually a really good picture of what we need to do, what each one of us needs to own personally and actually do. When a person's in a space of hurting, there's nothing productive that comes out of having a defensive posture. Okay?
Right.
Let's own that we made mistakes. Because we're human. Just because we're humans together doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes together. Mistakes were made. But they weren't wrong or right types of things. What's difficult to pastor a person through or lead them through is, to them, the hurt is a wrong or a right type of hurt. It feels that way. Don't defend that. Affirm it. Tell them, I get it. I understand. You know, our job is to love them really well and to lead them wherever they need to go. They may go and then come back. They may choose to stay, and your choice to stay engaged is to keep walking alongside them. Or in Gary's scenario, they may leave, but you're still going to stay engaged because Vista isn't the point. The kingdom of Christ is the point. And we are kingdom leaders together. So I get it. The tough thing is we want to be able to give an answer we don't have.
Right.
We want to give a promise that we can't make yet. All we can rightly say is, we know it, we own it, and we're working on it, and I want to invite you to hang out with us, but if you can't, I'm still with you.
Sure.
I am for you and with you. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. That's engagement. That's what we need to do. And that's hard, tedious work, and it's going to feel heartbreaking for you, but better you than them, in my opinion, because you're the leaders of the church.
I don't think there's a mistake made in this situation. I think that the pride can have time to mature.
Yeah.
That's right. That's perfect.
Most people say, I mean, using their vernacular,
Right.
you did something wrong, is how they're going to, I hear what you're saying. I don't feel defensive,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Right.
So, because they need to be shepherded. Everybody in this room is a shepherd. That's what you're called to be, in one respect or another.
Two other quick points. Proactive networking and partnerships. Because building community doesn't come natural. Most churches are very independent in what they do. Even when we want to work together, it's very hard to do. There's pastors around town, and we say, hey, let's work together on something. It's like, I don't have time. So but what networking we do have and what global partnerships we have, we're trying to be proactive, building networks, because it's, honestly, you're better as a church. It's safer as a church to have that. So we want to be proactive and not become an independent, thing.
Like, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What, maybe we don't know, but what are people's perceptions about the level at which we are networking and partnering locally, nationally, globally? Like, are we doing that? Is the goal to do them in a third, or 25, 25, 50, 50, 10, 40? Like, what is the goal as far as having partnerships? Because, like, we hear a lot from the front about, like, Asia's Hope and, other things that we're doing locally with the bridge, like your involvement with the college network. Like, do we have a plan as to, like, how we're networking and partnering and in what proportions? Or is that even important to us? Because people, I think, hear a lot about the Asian Hope and everything overseas, but our local ministry, we have a coordinator, but I don't hear much about what's going on in Worthington. Maybe that's because I'm not listening, but, like, I don't know what the strategy is as far as, like, proportional across those demographics.
Instead of answering that question, can I write a note or conclude from what you're saying that our national footprint is far more visible and evident than our local one?
Maybe our international.
That's what international, global, that's what I meant to say, than our local. Is that fair?
That's my perception.
I'd like to just write it down as something we should think about how
On it.
he's on it.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an active question on the table. Getting that clarified.
Because, like, we have a physical presence here in Worthington. There's a lot of folks that, live within 1 square mile of this building. I don't know what we're doing to engage them. I do know what we're doing to engage folks across the globe.
That's good.
In Africa or in Asia, in different places. But
I think I think what I would say the answer is we have a shared concern, but I think it would be going too far to say we actually have a plan for that. Yeah, this one.
No, I wouldn't say we have a plan. Plan for me is documented, and here's the thing we're doing. Where we are in this particular chapter of our culture is there are things that have naturally developed over time, and those are now translating into a season where we have to get more clear about the next stage of development. So we have a pretty robust, in my opinion, global footprint. And there's still opportunities to develop that. But we don't want to develop that to somehow call it unintentional neglect of what I would phrase as for the city. First and foremost, we are sent as missionaries to where we already live, work, and play. Okay? Think about that area. That's not to the exclusion of people overseas. because we are also very well resourced in our context. And so our reach can go beyond our local context. But we also have to start to shore up our clarity and start to better understand how to engage our neighbors, our fellow students, the people that we work with, et cetera, et cetera. The tough thing is resources are always limited, right? Bandwidth is always limited. So how do we keep this robust and healthy and growing while still starting to ratchet up the focus and clarity in the local and national space too? That's the stage we're in right now. Adam Heath, who you know probably mostly from the teaching team space, he's also leading in the global partner space, but there's a trickle down into local missions as well. We're talking about that together. He has a ton of great ideas. We just need to start pulling those things together and begin to implement. And what's not in front of you today is an annualized schedule that is extremely wet cement, but it does include what I call city mission. It is a very intentional reach into our local context. The heartbeat of that isn't any different than global mission, but it is much more clear and intentional about the local space. Plus, I just heard you're going to lead a table for IF. That is one of the best discipleship platforms I've seen in a long time. And the only thing I'm jealous about is that it's for ladies, and it would be really weird if I tried to lead a table in that space. I don't think my wife would be happy. But that's another example of national, local, focused, discipleship-based, missional-based partnering platform. So instead of us trying to build something that someone else is already doing better, come alongside that, hitch our wagon to it, celebrate it, invest in it, release people into it. I mean, that's kingdom. I mean, the goal is kingdom, right? So that's a wordy way to answer your question. But I'm starting to feel like any question you have, I can confidently say we're on it. But I can't make you promises yet because I don't want to break promises to anybody.
But there's things happening. If you go up Mitchell DeWitt Road, right, they're building 5,000 apartments, whatever they're building out there. There's things happening quickly where we should be prepared to communicate.
You know, in the Worthington context, I was just having a conversation with Justin. His heart is getting heavy there's a pretty dense population of condos and apartments in this area. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of development happening in the Northwest.
Well, in Dublin, they're just going to move in. They probably don't have an association. Most don't have an association with their church or this type of stuff. So it's a different opportunity than somebody who's already lived there for 3 years.
Yeah. This is slightly off in the weeds, but this is what I know about our landscape. The single largest people group in Columbus, which is also the single fastest growing people group, is the irreligious. And what I'm hearing more lately is there's a correspondence between two people groups. The nominal Christian, the disengaged Christian used to be like the hot topic for churches. Lately I'm hearing that population is decreasing, which at first blush I was like, oh, that's good news. Because the engaged are increasing. However, the overall church population is decreasing because the secular population, the irreligious population, that's where the nominals are going. They're disengaging from the church altogether and going into a self-identified irreligious group. In Columbus, if you know anything about marketing, Columbus is a test market for the nation, one of 3 major test markets. It's true for all statistical groups within our culture, including religion, spirituality, faith-based, politics, you name it. Columbus is representative of our nation to a great extent. So, again, I use opportunity-based language. We have a ton of opportunity to reach a ton of people for the sake of Christ. We just need to engage this mission with a greater sense of ownership and urgency. And that's exactly what we're doing at Vista. And I know there are other churches in our city doing the same thing. And we're going to keep figuring out ways to work together because our reach is multiplied through more people, right?
Okay.
So, yeah, that's legit.
Mike and Andrew, time some insults. So we're not part of Life Group, and I feel bad about that, but we don't have time. And we're very involved with Young Life and Wildlife, and you know this. In the last 2 years, I've reached out to people here saying, hey, we're recycling these leaders, I'm leading Young Life, I'm stretched pretty thin, I need to recruit more leaders, we need to do this. And even kind of to Cindy's point, is this an approved organization? Everyone knows Young Life. That's our thing. Nicole teaches we are overlapping in so many ways with Jonathan Alder with that. Mm-hmm. And even talking about not doing student ministries, our kids have no interest in that because they're so involved with Young Life and even to the point, we'll let Alex skip church on Sunday. Like if you went to small group campaigners and club, I'm going to let you skip because you have church, and that's our definition of that. But and I'm looking forward to, that's my project, I'm looking forward to working with Gary and Cindy because I need more outside eyes to help me do that better.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm doing it and I'm keeping up, but I'm not really, are we maximizing the wildlife impact and doing what really needs to be done with it instead of just, oh, it's Friday, I got to come up with something.
Yeah.
Oh no, the leaders, we got to do this. And it's like, okay, how can we do that? How can you get, and I know you started Wildlife at Hilliard.
Yeah.
So
we hosted our own.
Is that something, and how do you do that in a decentralized way? And to Andrew's point, are you publicizing that and getting that out and saying, okay, Todd and Mary Ann Terrier host club, the McRae's are involved, we host campaigners and lead wildlife. I mean, Vista's basically doing Jonathan Alder, wildlife and Young Life, for the most part. And not just that, financially, too, they give a ton. And so you're going, wow, there's a great thing here. And yet it's not even on the map for the most part but it's happening and it's good and it's great. But then you can get the perception, well, what are we doing for our kids? Well, Mike can't go, hey, let me tell you what we're doing.
These
You
families
guys live in a
are
school district.
involved in that. They're
Yeah, you
involved.
live-
They go into Krista's house and
Yeah.
meet with Matt and those guys.
Yeah, and we live in the same subdivision. So,
Yeah.
are you able to elaborate on?
So this is what I ask you to do.
That's good.
The engagement I'm talking about, it starts right here, and it starts among us. I forget half of what I know every day when I write it down. And I'm one person in this community, and that's true for anybody that's in this room, irrespective of what your title and role is. So when you know something awesome is happening in our city, I need you to engage me, not just once, but I need you to hound me. I need you to hound Gary, Mike, the leaders that are around you. Because we want to connect the right dots. And we want to make sure that conversation gets connected to that knowledge. Because if there's one story of a person leaving that irks me the most, is because they didn't know what they were missing. If someone leaves and they know what they're leaving, forget it. But if they leave and they don't know what they're leaving, or they don't know what they're missing, they don't know what's in the pipe, that bothers me a lot. I know we can't close those gaps overnight, and I know we have to keep working on it, but that frustrates me a ton.
Chris?
I want families to know about what you're doing.
Is there talk of time being given from the front for those things?
Yeah.
Because at one time there was, and then there wasn't, and then there was, and then there was, so I didn't know, where are we with that for the
Yeah,
next
so,
year?
so Young Life, and by extension all the sub-ministries of Young Life, they are a partner, a central partner of Vista. People who have been around know that. I don't think people who are newer to our community really know that. So one of the steps towards that has been to put Heather Eschbach in place as the overall director of communications. Her heartbeat goes well beyond communications. I mean, she is a discipleship person. And we're having to pull it back to getting good at a few things first, so that gets on autopilot, and then start layering on. So this Sunday, you'll notice that there is a partner video woven into the programming. It's not that hasn't happened before, but you're going to start seeing that type of a voice and imagery with a greater frequency, with a greater intentionality. Because we know you can't just say something once and it's like, got it. We have to say it over and over again. It's like you got to preach the gospel to your heart over and over again because you forget it 5 minutes later. That's the nature of everything that we're doing. That's not even about church. That's just life. So we have to become experts at that.
And so the things that are coming in and playing, are those more story-oriented, like, hey, we're doing wildlife at our house and this is how we're involved, or are they
That's the
more
goal.
like advertisement?
Yeah,
type?
so Mike's heart there has been to how do we put compelling stories in front of our people? And how do we do that in such a way that it removes the barrier of some of their expectations around the quality of that or how it's executed? And how do we make sure that it's consistent? Because we know people learn things over time. They feel compelled by things over time. And so that's one of the mandates that's on the plate. We got to figure out that puzzle. What's the correct resourcing? We're coming into 2019 with a good resource pipe, which I'm excited about, so we can start executing on these things. I love talking about stuff, but at the end of the day, we need to land the stuff because that's where it gets real. And we're on the cusp of making some of these things real, which is one more reason why I'm excited. So, but don't stop having those questions and asking. Because frankly, I might forget because somebody else brought up something that's also important. I'm like, oh, okay, do that.
And putting an ask in it for Young Life, I know Josh wants to get Marysville going. So, hey, are there Marysville people to get, here's what could happen here if we had more people.
Yeah.
So let's replicate it. There's opportunity to do that with structure.
Yeah.
That's the great thing about that. You got instant structure with the leadership team, and people can step in and do it.
And worst case scenario, just be prepared. Even if we have a robust landscape of meaningful things for families to plug into, they still may, in some form or fashion, say that's not enough. Affirm them, lead them, pastor them, get them where they need to go. Feel free to do that. That's hard, I get it, but sometimes it happens. All right, next slide. I want to make sure that you guys have the programming schedule, the current lineup through Easter. Like Mike was saying earlier in respect to Financial Peace University, every line item here is an opportunity for engagement. It is an opportunity for your engagement. It is an opportunity for you to call others to engage. Not everything fits with every person, but no one should ever be saying we don't have opportunities to take a step. We have them. And we're going to start publishing what that looks like. We're going to start programming what that looks like. So this is called a developing rough draft of our annualized scheduling, but you can start to see these things lined up. Sermon series content. We couldn't start with a better sermon series. Yes, I will. It's all about taking a step, all about coming before God and saying yes. This month, like every month, we'll end in communion, a significantly spiritually deep opportunity to take a step of engagement. Also at the end of this month, the CPs or someone designated to represent coming changes, they're going to start socializing, start talking about programming flow changes that are going to be experienced on a Sunday morning.
CPs are campus pastors.
I'm sorry, campus pastors, CPs. And then that's going to
Christian
roll.
police.
The Christian police. Yeah, okay. Then we're going to roll into our next 4-week series. The working title.
But what are the flow changes going to happen in the service? Or are you going to share that leadership?
There's already been some subtle implementation changes that I immediately got feedback on was positive. I was even surprised that it was noticed. So there's a season where it's kind of subtle, but before there's anything that's obviously a change, we're going to have that dialogue first. Partly so that it's just information, but partly because you know. And so if people come up and they're talking to you, you know how to talk to them. It's not like a news flash to you, you know. Then we're going to roll to the next 4-week series. The working title is Generosity. It'll probably be articulated a little bit differently. Grief Share kicks off early February as well. Here's what I know is the truth about spaces like that. I can have 5 conversations with people, and I can hear a space of grieving to one respect or another. But we look at things like life support, like you already have to be in critical care, and so because I'm not, on death's door or whatever that subject is, then life support or grief share, what have you, isn't for me. That's totally not true. Think of it as a space of equipping. You can be a person who's grieving, and you need grief share for that ministry. You can be a person who knows someone who's grieving, and you need to be in that space to be equipped in how to minister to them, because maybe they don't want to step into that particular grief share space. Not any different than Financial Peace University. I mean, money is a big deal, last I checked. And last I checked, I know people where money is a really tough deal for them. And it's not like money's everything, but the lack of it can become everything to a person. So money seems like just a practical thing, but it can be a deeply spiritual thing as well. So we have to start adopting this mindset of engagement, and the spaces that we're doing are all to equip us to be disciples who make disciples. And so you got to start looking in the mirror and just asking, how do I better engage these spaces? How do I call people to engage in spaces? Leadership community coming up early February as well. You all have already seen communications about the leadership commissioning of Lisa Travis. And then later that week is the annual IF gathering, which is going to be hosted here. And then Financial Peace begins mid-February. It's actually 2 different starts, one for Dublin, one for Worthington. And then there's the public commissioning of Lisa, which is all church. That's going to be a Sunday morning service. And then we're bringing in Pastor Dan late February over the course of 3 Sundays, which is a longer than normal stint for him. He'll actually be up front in a teaching capacity. Mike will be up there helping with translation, for lack of a better description. But a much more intentional approach to receiving his leadership, to receive his paradigm of discipleship and get a better idea of what God's doing in Kenya in and through his church. And then we're going to enter right into Lent after that, which is for a ton of people, a deeply spiritual season, tons of opportunity for engagement, not just personally, but corporately. And then the focus is, instead of the historical focus of solitude, we're going to switch here more towards engagement and equipping. So again, we're going to keep that theme going forward. And then we have Ash Wednesday, and then we don't want to forget about the time change and Pop-Tarts and PJs, which is a good family engagement time, which doesn't happen in the church. It happens right in your neighborhood. And then we're going to get to the best holiday of the year, which is Easter. And that's just the first quarter of 2019. It's packed. There's tons of awesome stuff already lined up. And then we're going to keep that momentum going through the year and into 2020 as well. So just a snapshot. Any questions you have, any information you need, don't hesitate to email me or whomever. It'll get connected to where it needs to get connected, and we'll get you equipped to have that dialogue, whatever that might be. So that's the schedule. All right, next slide. A lot of information. This is we're calling it the transformation grid. You could also look at this as an assimilation process in a way. We're going to work towards a published piece and then build equipping around it. It generally flows from top left to bottom right, but it isn't necessarily linear. People can move around this grid as needed depending on where their story's at. But you notice on the far left side, the top row is about starting, about first steps. The middle row, growing, is about growing in those steps, growing in your maturity, growing in your opportunities for transformation. And then that bottom row is about multiplying that. Because think of it this way. The gospel didn't come to you so that it would just rest with you. The gospel came to you because it's supposed to go to somebody else. And that happens through multiplication of your relationships, your faith, etc. Somewhere in that first quadrant, for those that don't know God, they tend to find God in one respect or another. And then somewhere in that bottom right quadrant, their beginning relationship with God begins to mature to something that is a calling. It gets more specific. The urgency and the passion grows in that space. And then in the middle of that is small group community. For us, the top of that is life group. That's where more often than not, if we can get someone plugged into small group community, it's life group. But we recognize that life group isn't necessarily the best first step into small community for everybody. And so we are talking more and more about other groups. So Grief Share, for example, is a small group community, but it's more specific. So that would be an example. Mike, do you want to talk more about this grid? I mean, we will definitely have equipping around this, and you'll have a polished piece at some point. But I just want to make sure you see this before that time.
2 things. Number one, these are what I would call church or corporate steps. right? All of these have to do with the church environment, what we're doing together. You see, attending and celebrating and bringing to basically our main gathering, our Sunday services. Relational, you're serving on a team, you're connecting in a life group, you're starting or leading a new group. Again, church faith. Praying, less 10, starts to move a little personal there, partnering locally and globally, being involved locally and globally, and then being part of planting a new church, which is what the church does. When you get to that center one in the life group or in a small group, now you're dealing with, on a more personal level, what are the steps that God has somebody taking? Who is in need of forgiveness? What kind of equipping do you need? How are you working through that grief? What's up financially, right? So inside that group quadrant, right at the very center, is where all the personal stuff happens. But we're learning about steps of faith corporately together. And so this grid is the campus pastor's bread and butter right here. It's their job. Everybody in the church is probably somewhere on that grid. If they aren't, I'd like to know where that would be. And you're trying to encourage and help people to move through that. And it's a faith exercise. And if you look at the little bubbles there, if someone's attending, they're starting to celebrate, they're serving a little bit, we certainly want to lead them to Christ. We want them to find their way back to God. We want them to be saved. And then as you start to move through that, you're thinking, not only are they saved, not only are they taking steps of faith within the church, what is their calling in life? What is it? What mission are they personally on in their world? And so this is broad and deep, and it's not just corporate, but it's personal. Although this is defining some of our corporate steps more so than the personal ones.
Yeah. And just so you know, Gary's been working closely with the CPs for over a year, or close to a year. There was an earlier rendition of this that Mike had kind of pressed out to members of the team, and it continues to evolve as we keep learning and relearning. So some of our key leaders are already handling pieces and parts of this. Now we're getting into the season where all the pieces and parts are probably very close to the finished state of how we want to word things and articulate things, and so we can start to publish that and more broadly communicate that. And so there might be a tweak or two between this piece and the thing that's actually handed to you, but just have a working awareness of this. Really, the first question you want to ask is, where am I in this grid? Because this is also an assessment tool for yourself as much as how you are leading others.
Basically, what we did with the campus pastors is we spent about a year and we tore each one of these boxes apart and said, how do they do their job? So what do they do when somebody walks through the door? How do they get them, involved in all that? So we have a document for each of those boxes of things that they do, and that, as Chris says, is working some, and it continues to change as we get better.
Just keep making it better.
So I have some thoughts. I see what you're doing. I really like this. I think it's great to have a flow for assimilating. So in the worshipful category, that makes sense. Attending, then you're celebrating, then you're bringing and giving sacrificially. Relational and missional, and maybe I'm just in part not understanding. Once we get down to the third category of multiplying, we have planting a new church and starting a small group. I feel like every person in the church on the worshipful side can get to the point where they're bringing and giving sacrificially, whereas relational and missional, like if I'm not a person who is capable or gifted of leading a small group, I'm going to feel like I'm never multiplying. And then the same would be true on the missional side. So I'm wondering if it should be more broad.
What would you put in there? I see where you're going. I get that. That's a good point. What would you put in there?
With relational, maybe it has something to do with just reaching your potential as a. I don't know, but
I see what you got. I see what
reaching your potential as a gifted person, using your gifts to serve outside, to serve the body, something like that.
Yeah. Where we're headed with this would be you're stepping out to lead in some fashion. There's something that I'm trying to grasp there. Maybe it shouldn't be focused on group leadership, but there is. What do you say?
Using your gifts in accordance with your faith. There's a faith part. There's a risk part of this. Of stepping.
Yeah, it's related to that calling piece, actually.
Yeah. It's not just about you anymore, I think, too. It's not like I'm joining a group. It's like I'm looking around me for other people who need to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that doesn't always look like leading a start.
Yeah. That's right. That might be a little too narrow. It really what happens and again this is here's an actual practical tension that we face is and maybe this is an argument for it rather than against it is we have plenty of people that come through Vista and they're used to a programmatic space where there's different ways to just start using your time and your gifts. But what we have always said is we just want you to be pouring into other people. There's people that just need a place to come and gather. Maybe that's not a life group per se, but at some point you need to help other people be moving along in their Christianity. That's what we're really looking for there, is that kind of turning around and helping someone else walk. It's discipleship, really.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, are you discipling others? Would be the most generic way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're really looking for there. And in our context, that happens most significantly, programmatically, in life groups. But we're looking for you to lead other people in their Christian walk.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, sometimes we define small groups too narrowly. I could almost build a case that everyone can lead a group, everyone. Not the same group, not a life group necessarily, but maybe an accountability group where there's 6 questions that we're talking about biblical implementation, and there's only 3 involved, and you're one of them. You know, so there may be different ways. The idea is not necessarily a small group. The idea is biblical community. Is what is God, and like, is there precedent from Scripture to say everybody ought to be discipling somebody? You know,
That's where we're headed there. What about the missional one? Again, remember, these are corporate steps. This is what we have. And when we think about missional, it starts with, are you praying for people in your life that are far from God? Bless them, praying. Again, corporately, where do we want people to go after that? They can be involved in some kind of local ministry that's pressing outward.
Mm-hmm.
It's reaching, it's edge kind of work in the city and in your community. And then, I know this is what we're about as a church. We're trying to multiply sites and churches. So
Yeah.
I get there's a little thing maybe missing there, but I don't know quite programmatically what to do with it, but it's a good
Aaron,
point.
is that leading if it was like strengthening or something like that? You know, be
Part of the church plan.
You strengthen the church, strengthen yourself.
Yes.
Set up church. Hey,
Yeah, I mean,
ministry.
Oh, yeah. Planting a church, that certainly needs definition. It's be on a church team. It's not like,
Yeah, because
it's not
almost,
be the planter.
Yeah, and even so, though, it would make somebody feel like, 5 years later, if I'm still serving at Dublin or I'm still serving at Worthington, and I haven't gone on the other side, then I'm not.
Yeah.
I haven't multiplied.
Yeah, so I can answer that one. We have an acronym that we use for being involved with planting a church. It's GROW. And it's been a long time since we've had to use this, but it's like the G is to, I think, actually go. And let me just simplify it. The other 3 are ways where you're involved and you're not going. I'll leave it at that. That planting a church doesn't mean that you're going. It could mean many different things. So anyway, that's a little bit better. A little bit better.
Yeah.
The GROW part.
That's a great question. We don't want anybody looking at anything we're doing and saying, well, there's not a space for me there. Now, anything you publish, somebody's going to see something like, well,
yeah.
So it's never going to be quite right.
But that's good.
Yeah.
I think we want to keep refining, so we probably keep moving on.
Yeah, so I'm going to wrap this up a little bit early. I know the weather's shifting. I know that Cindy has some things she needs to communicate to you. Look at this. This is a discipleship flywheel as a working term. It is basically the fundamental model of how we are disciples and make disciples. You hear from God, you obey what God says, and you help others to hear from God and obey and to do likewise. Because you don't want to just make a disciple and it stops there. You want to make a disciple that's a disciple maker. And that's a different form of equipping. And then you want to skip the group exercise, and then we'll just transition to...
Go ahead and do it if you want.
So Gary ran us through a fantastic exercise with staff. You need to pair off, and you have exactly 3 minutes to share your story in Christ with the other person, and you need to make the gospel evident. Because at the center of all of our engagement is gospel living. It is the power by which we have been saved. It is the power that we have been entrusted with and need to multiply in and through others. What I'm going to pass around real quick is I've got a stash of gospel resources that for me personally I've used to become more familiar with the language and the concepts and the identity of the gospel, who Jesus is, who I am in relation to Jesus, what his call is on my life, what my mission is because of Jesus. This is a sampling of my stash. One of them is a piece of one of Mike's sermons, gospel context from way back in 2012. I've got something from a church called Soma. I've got something else which is a little more academic from a church called Village Church. This is not exhaustive. The gospel can take a different flavor for different people, but there is a common core, and that's Christ. So I'm going to pass that around, and then I didn't want you to have that before you have to do this exercise.
Okay, so the idea in the exercise is, what was it like before? How did you meet Christ? And what does it mean to you now? So you got 3 minutes to get with somebody. We'll blow a whistle in 3 minutes, and then the other person will share their story with you. The idea is we don't really want you to prepare for this. It's as simple as the blind man. Once I was blind, now I can see. That's my story. Well, what about this? Once I was blind, now I see. That's it. And so it can be relatively simple, but we find that in the church, people say, I don't know how to share. And this is the first step in being able to share the gospel is your story, because nobody can argue with it. So if you'll get with the person next to you, and then we'll blow a whistle in 3 minutes and do it. Go ahead. Two. Now you guys split up. Here, come on. You guys split up with those two. 2 and 2.
You guys need a 2-minute whistle?
Hey, the timer's running.
Timer's running. Hurry up.
Somebody bring a seat.
They just have a brief so we're going to give 2 minutes Someone's gone already. That was fast.
You know, I was walking around there's like there's at least a half dozen steps where there are 5, 6 years. Yeah, there's like strings, they string along, they don't necessarily stay 3 minutes.
Most people write a book when they're a particular topic that captures them.
It's hard.
Yeah, turn it into something. We flip around. Something I just don't know how to do it. So overwhelming to think about looking at
I'm sorry, it's not some of that. What I've seen so far.
All right, you're halfway through. Halfway through 3 minutes.
Just change it. Yeah, I mean, that conversation between other next conversation can work. The logistics and everything work out. It's not quite the so, makes all of your stuff go down. A little scattered.
No, it's only 2 quarters. I've been involving myself in Google Docs for at least 4 years. Before I moved to Google, I had a Dropbox that all messages were all the way back to 2005. I didn't overload Dropbox every year.
I see evidence of people making copies.
Okay, change. Change the other person now.
No matter where you are in your life.
No matter where you are in your life story, switch it. You got 3 minutes.
Nope, I'm a guy, if I can get my hands on it.
And I feel that tension all the time. You actually do that pretty well. That's what that I am sabotaging my ability to be I'm sure you but I bring it on myself, and I not actually grabbing the lever of power. And I actually feel you really do.
Okay, time's up. Time's up. Let me ask you a question. What'd you learn from this?
Everybody has a story.
Everybody has a story. What else?
Even though the stories are different, we can relate.
Yes. Super. What else? We can relate. Everybody's got a story. Doesn't take long. You can. We're all messed up. That's right. That's why you say at the end, "This is what it means to me now." I'm still struggling, right? I don't have it all together.
You can't really tell a story without showing some vulnerability.
Yes. Vulnerability, transparency.
It wasn't that hard to get to my story.
Yes.
And you trust, for the most part, you trust the person sitting across from you right now. For the
Anything
most
else?
part.
I know Mike much better, just by listening.
Yep.
My guess is that there's probably not as many mountaintop stories as you think there are.
Yep.
Basically.
Yep. I even heard Angie say that there wasn't much before because it always kind of, it wasn't.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
I was totally, I didn't know God. There was no such thing as God. All of a sudden, I got to the top of a mountain, and God spoke to me. And all of a sudden, it all became clear.
So most of them are much more normal.
Yeah, it's like normal life happened for a long time and grounded me down and spit me out, and I realized I need God.
More of a gutter story.
I get that. That makes sense to me.
Okay, here's what I want to challenge you to do. Mike's already done it. Mike heard this story and did it with his small group and is going to do it again so that other people can hear other stories. I challenge you to do this as a first step to help your people. You can share the gospel by sharing your story. So in your communities, go ahead and do that. In your life groups, in your Bible study groups, in your... I don't think I've been in a Bible study group in the last 4 years that I haven't done this because they're all saying, this is your story. Go ahead and share it. Okay, we're going to end by Cindy. Thank you, Chris.
Sure,
Thanks for
thank
coming
you.
in. You're doing a great job. I love it.
And we gave you Chris's email if you didn't have it before, and so I'm sure you would. You're packing up my stuff.
Oh, is that, I thought that was Gary's stuff.
It's okay. So if you have any other questions on this, feel free to contact you on that. Or sometimes we take in information and we don't think of those questions until halfway through the next week, right? So if you have things that come up, I'm sure he would love to hear. Because like you said, it's a collaboration, and whatever we can do to encourage one another in that space and to ask each other real questions that will lead to real solutions and real communication, then that's what we would desire for each other. So you have the beginning of a new semester, and this is your syllabus. You did not get it until right now. So I told you before this semester started that if I were you, I would work through your church history books. If you wanted to get ahead, well, now you're going to feel that pinch if you did not do that, because you're going to have to read those three books, within a month of each other. So if you haven't been doing that work, you probably will want to get on spending some quality time for that. Remember, the Anno Domini books are just history books. They're not devotion. They are devotional books. We're not using them as devotional books. And you're going to actually read all of this book before. We're going to read these two at the same time. So you're going to read this first. Todd and I are going to start with church history, as you see in the next class. So, from here, you have a paper that you have to write me from your Real Deal group. I want to know a minimum of 1 page with scripture references, personal growth examples that came to you from that experience, and also group connection examples. Does that make sense, what I'm looking for? This is how this book affected me. Group connect. You met as a small group. How did that time influence you? What did you learn from that time? And what did you learn from your own personal time in that book? Does that make sense?
Are you looking for a particular font size?
Don't ask her. Erin tends to be verbose, so that's okay. My daughter is a writer, and she's fantastic at it, and she always likes to give way more than is necessary. She thinks she's still in the vein that she thinks that's great. So I used to be a history teacher, right? So if you can say it in 3 sentences, that's great. But no, not 20-point font.
I was going for 6.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you want 6. So what I'm looking for is examples, specific examples, not vague, it made me closer with God. I don't know what that means. Anecdotal evidence and scripture reference. So I do the 1 page minimum because some of you will write me 4 sentences only. Some of you will write me 17 pages. I don't have time to do that.
So that goes to you?
Yes, that goes to me. So between now and the next class, get her done and send her to me. I'm not a real good speller, so I probably won't notice me to the spelling mistakes, but there is spell check and grammar check for a reason, so. Then, when we're going through Anno Domini, both books, you're going to keep a list of new vocab and new events. So if something's in there, if you've never heard of this person, You're going to write that on your list. Make sense? You're going to share 10 of those for each half of these books. It's 20 each on your Vista Connect page over the next month. Okay? So you're like, hey, I didn't know who this person was. Hey, I didn't know what this word meant. You're going to share that. But if you look at the end of this, if you look at February 16, paper, choose 10 vocab events or vocab or events. So you're going to write me another paper in February. Okay? So keep your list and share them on Vista Connect because that's your research for writing your paper. Yay! See, try to, little bites for you all. And then if you turn the page over after March 2, look at there's no assignments. Does that mean you're not going to have any assignments in March, April, and May?
Yes, that's what that
I
means.
guess
That is not what that means. I can guarantee you there will be assignments. Those will be things that we will put in your files as they come about. Okay. If you look on Hobby, he's still deciding on some topics. We still got 2 dates that we're trying to lock down and put up our actual content that we want to cover. Once we do the church history books, there's no more books. Probably. Flexible. I'm flexible if somebody brings one, but most of that stuff through March, April, and May will be stuff we'll either hand out to you to read for the next time, or it will be stuff that's in your files. Okay? Any questions on that? I will get back. I will send something out about projects. You were asked to pray about that, to think about that. Some of you have already locked that down. For the rest of you, we need to get that set so you can get busy on that. Not busy like, but fruitful. Better word? All right. I will put this digitally on your on the group too. Yeah.
You know the Hannah Donovan thing was on our syllabus for last time. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That was I didn't notice that was
the first one.
design or something.
Yeah.
So it's like
kind of start.
I felt good because like I already.
Yeah, good job. Me too.
Okay.
Look at you.
All right. Father, thank you so much for this morning. Very thought-provoking, very trying to understand who you are and why you do what you do and what does that mean to us and how do we be the people that you want us to be. Thank you for Vista. Thank you for all that you're doing here. Thank you for every person here who is a minister at Vista. And we are grateful that you allow us to be a part of your ministry. In Jesus' name, amen.